Hello there, and welcome to the Bitcoin Takeover podcast. This is season 16, episode 48. Time does fly. We're almost at 52, which is the number of weeks in a year. So basically, I've put out more than one episode per week, which is incredible. Anyway, we are live right now with Christopher Smith, also known on Twitter as Yuvi Lightman, and also known on Soundcloud because he also has a music career as Ganesha 1024. 1024. I'm not sure how you say that, but it's an incredible SoundCloud account where you have this classical music which you mix with opera. It's amazing, really. I was listening to it last night. My mind was blown. Usually, when you find someone's SoundCloud in the description, it's just them playing on some Korg MIDI controller, playing with Ableton or GarageBand or whatever, and putting out some experimental music. But yours is really amazing. Your piano playing is incredible. And you're working on something which is called Quantus, which is an attempt to create a zero knowledge quantum resistant blockchain. And what else? You are part of the cypherpunk crowd that came to Bitcoin early on, and I'm gonna ask you about that too. And there's so much to talk about. Welcome on the show.
Well, thank you so much, Vlad. It's really an honor to be here. You just reached out to me out of nowhere, and it was just kind of perfect timing. And so yeah, I'm happy to talk about all of it. I was aware of your podcast, and I saw your interacted with you on Twitter. So I kind of liked your irreverent, fearless way of communicating. What you thought about Bitcoin, and I think share quite a few opinions with you about Bitcoin. And I'm happy to hash it out. I also am a big fan of steel manning, so like to give the opposition the absolute best chance that we can in order to make their point, so that we may extract the best, the truth out of what everyone's saying.
I get accused a lot of straw manning, which is something else. But anyway, you did mention that you expressed some views about Bitcoin, and I was going to ask you, what's your current view on Bitcoin? As we speak right now, we just hit a new all-time high of $125,000. It seems like October is on, but at the same time, at the technical level, it looks pretty depressing. We haven't had any upgrade in a while. Everything is getting stalled. The conversations are stuck around filtering transactions, which is disappointing. But what do you think about it? How do you see it?
Well, I mean, just for a little bit of background, I found out about Bitcoin in 2012. I was a computer science and math student, and I didn't have an investor mindset. But later on, I ended up contributing to BitcoinJ. I founded a startup that did Bitcoin micropayments for internet. It was called BitMesh, and you could pay by the second or the kilobyte for internet through Bitcoin payment channels. I think it was the first commercial implementation of payment channels.
Wait, BitcoinJ
And
was the library by Mike Hearn?
that's right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he was
And
also the creator of payment channers.
that's right. So that was how I learned about it. Actually, I was looking through his source code, and then I thought, oh, this is really cool. We should do this through the browser. Bitcore, I forget their company that made it. That was a JavaScript library at the time. But anyway, they had a sort of incompatible implementation of payment channels because it wasn't fully specified at the time, and so I had to work out an adapter to make it work, and that was how I really got to know the internals of Bitcoin. And it's a work of art. I mean, I think the Bitcoin white paper is is a kind of masterpiece that that I think everybody who's interested in Bitcoin should actually go read that white paper. And if you don't understand some of the technical words, that's okay. Go ask Grok or whoever to explain it to you. But it's only 8 pages, and it's exquisite. Is it the end all be all? Is it the final answer for everything in the universe? No. But if you want to understand, you want to experience the clear thinking that produced it, I think you need to hear it from the horse's mouth. And really, I think money's been dramatically overcomplicated by people who don't really want other people to understand how it works. It's actually quite simple in its essence. It's that you do things for other people, and then they voluntarily send you points. Your number goes up, and then other people do things for you, and then your number goes down, and their number goes up. So it's this sort of like give and take collaboration technology. And but of course, there's a lot of the devil's in the details, so to speak. And so yeah, I've point is that I've been in Bitcoin for a long time. I love Bitcoin. I don't want Bitcoin to die. You know, and you know, there's a lot of these like, you know, glowy-eyed Bitcoin influencers, you know, who nobody ever seems to have met, is you know, their response to any criticism is to say, oh, you don't understand Bitcoin. And you know, in some cases that might be true, but in my case, it's not. I do understand Bitcoin, and my opinions are not going to be dismissed so easily. So that being said, what do I think about Bitcoin? I mean, I'm happy for all the Bitcoiners that got rich from Bitcoin. You know, I don't want to throw shade on them. I'm glad BlackRock is pumping their bags. You know, I'm glad the numbers going up, but you know, clearly they're still thinking in dollars if they're celebrating about, you know, all-time highs. So, you know, this whole idea of store of value versus medium of exchange versus unit of account. You know, this was a kind of useful idea that was, I think, introduced by central banks. To be clear, this division of the roles of money into this trinity. And it might be useful in some cases, but I think in some cases it's also quite misleading. I mean, these things cannot be fully separated. You know, something cannot be. If something cannot be transferred, then it's hard to measure its value. How do you express the value of something that you could never send to someone else? So anyway, I think Bitcoin has, you know, I like the name of your podcast because it does. I think there has been essentially a corporate takeover of Bitcoin, and I don't think they weren't able to put the genie back in the bottle, but they could kind of like keep the genie quarantined and make sure they bought off all the early revolutionaries, so now they're like in a money coma and don't feel like overthrowing the central banks anymore. And at the same time, there's, you know, I think various sympathetic elements in governments around the world that were like, yeah, you know what, maybe the banks do have too much power, and so maybe we should, you know, kind of balance that out and decentralize the authority to mint new currency. But really, you know, Bitcoin has this cultural ethos of we're never ever going to change anything because we got it right, perfectly right, and you should never change it. And I disagree. I think some things should change more quickly. Some things should change less quickly. But this idea that Bitcoin is perfect and will never be disrupted is patently false. And also, Bitcoin has already gone through significant changes on its path to its current state. I mean, SegWit, you know, was a quite deep surgery for anyone who was actually looking at the source code. And I think it from a business point of view, not releasing a bottleneck because you have a 5-year plan to make this thing that barely works was a terrible decision. And I think it was the amount of kind of gaslighting around the topic was indication that it was actually a bad faith decision. I don't think that it was in Bitcoin's interest to stop people from using it for coffee. I mean, I had people say to my face, you know, like, "Oh, Bitcoin isn't for poor people," and you know, and that's sort of this like deal with the devil. You get to feel like you're exclusive on the inside with the big boys, and like, oh, fuck all those plebs. And but no, I signed up for peer-to-peer electronic cash, and I was quite sympathetic to the Bitcoin Cash people, but I think they were too autistic to resist all the social engineering going on, and you know, of course, the Craig Wright fiasco, and so I left. And I was super into Bitcoin. Bitcoin Cash forked, and I was like, okay, maybe I'll hang out with the Bitcoin Cash people, and they were still doing the same like infighting over, you know, stupid stuff. And then I went to Ethereum where people were actually building things. And you know, does Ethereum have its own problem? Yeah, it does. But at least like they were very collaborative. They wanted people to build and improve. And look, Vitalik's a genius. Gavin Wood is a genius. You know, so yeah. And since then, you know, I did a startup that built, you know, one of the earliest ICOs. It was called Lunar. It was Wikipedia on the blockchain. We had ads and a peer review system and a token, and so, you know, I like building shit and I'm good at it. But you know, the Bitcoin is in trouble, in my opinion. I think you know, people are very complacent about what's going on, but arguing about filters is not the best use of the Bitcoin community's time, uh, especially since you still have to accept it if it makes it on chain. And they're using it, to me, if you like just blur your eyes, like the people who are threatening you by saying, oh, we're going to put, or somebody's going to put child porn on your computer if you run this version of Bitcoin, like those people are gangsters. That's like some mafia blackmail, Jeffrey Epstein, like CIA shit. Like that is not how normal people talk. They're like who has a whole bunch of child porn and wants Bitcoin to fail? It's like who could that possibly be? Normal people don't even think about this topic. So when this term gets thrown around, and of course normal people just be like, oh my god, this is terrible, let me get out of here. And I think it's essentially trying to just disgust and scare people away from participating in this. And it's a and you know in some sense, I don't think the technology is the bottleneck on the intentions of Bitcoin to create a free monetary system for planet Earth. It's more the social bottleneck that people have difficulty coordinating. That people don't like thinking for themselves. They don't know who to trust. They're inclined to just trust somebody because they speak very confidently about something, and
And the numbers
and
going up, I think that's the biggest issue. Because when you have someone who confidently tells you that Bitcoin is going to hit $1 million and you seem to be on the way there, you're going to be like, I should trust this guy. He's always right. Bitcoin has always been number one. There was never any sort of consequence for not improving. On the contrary, stagnation seems to have paid off, and it seems like institutions are actually bullish about the fact that Bitcoin does not change in any way, even if it's detrimental to the long term success of the network. And it also makes me wonder sometimes whether or not BTC, the token, is more valuable than Bitcoin, the network, because these are separate, even though they were born together, they're bound to be separate. And I think with the launch of ETFs, they became separate.
yeah, it's
And
paper Bitcoin, right? It's an IOU for Bitcoin, which
at some
hopefully
point,
is.
it might become clear that BTC, the token, is going to move somewhere else. And it's not going to be secured by the same proof of work network. And I don't know how I feel about that. Maybe the Bitcoin network was just the cradle where the baby had to grow, and then it's going to be some other network. Or maybe it's just institutions telling you that, yeah, you can trust us, that we're selling you on paper only part of this 21 million supply cap. It's very strange to me. I think already we are dealing with a lot of paper Bitcoin on the market, and there should
Yeah.
be some education. I mean, there has always been. I remember there was this January the 3rd campaign that was called Proof of Keys Day. It was started by Trace Mayer, and he was saying on this day you should withdraw all your Bitcoin from exchanges just to prove that they're liquid, that they actually have the Bitcoin that they say they have. And of course, the impact was minimal, but it was part of the culture. People were doing this. Now it seems like even the guys who are advocating for proof of reserves have stepped back and they're like, yeah, it doesn't matter that much anymore. You can trust that these institutions are honest because they're regulated and they file reports to the government and they have to be honest, right? Which is the exact opposite of the mindset that I was seeing 10 years ago when I was reading about Bitcoin, but I was too afraid to buy. So where was I getting with this? Oh yeah,
Well,
I really want to. I'm gonna say this before I forget. I really hope that you can introduce me to Mike Hearn. I think he would be an incredible guest to have on the show because he famously rage quit 9 years ago, almost 10. It was in January of 2016, and I remember that very well because I wanted to buy Bitcoin at the time, and I didn't buy Bitcoin because of him.
Well, short answer is unfortunately I haven't communicated with him in a long time either. I was never close to him, but regarding the proof of reserves thing, I think one of the reasons I encourage people to read the Bitcoin white paper is because it contains this phrase, uh, without trusted third parties, And I think that really encapsulates a lot of the design philosophy of Bitcoin, that it was there, various trusted third parties in our system, whether that's a policeman or a judge or an insurance company or or the money printer or the bank, and the fact that they are trusted confers a lot of power to them, and if they misbehave, it may be difficult to notice or difficult to correct it. And so, and it's not that these trusted third parties don't exist for no reason. I mean, there's oftentimes they're filling a gap where humans, maybe most people, would rather have somebody who's a specialist do something for them, and it works if there's a kind of high trust environment. But sometimes I mean, like something I think people, I remember back when they were saying, "Oh, we need to stop calling it cryptocurrency. We need to start calling it blockchain because cryptocurrency is scary because it's like, I don't know, Tales from the Crypt or something." And but it's also like, cryptography is a munition. It's like it's a military technology. It's not something you need if we're all friends. It's something you do to protect information against being read or altered by adversaries. And of course, everyone would like to add an extra zero to their bank account. And so likewise, peer-to-peer networks invented by the U.S. military, a self-healing, communication network. Likewise, there's digital signatures. This is something, because somebody in the middle might alter your message in order to manipulate events in your communication. Something proof of work or secure hashes. I mean, all this stuff is like, it took me quite a while to learn this because it's way off the beaten path for computer science and math education. Like, unless you're going into this, the security direction, you don't generally encounter these ideas. So I had to teach them to myself. But in terms of this, like, the brand BTC or the ticker symbol, the token being decoupled from the network, I think to me, it's this repeating strategy that we've seen throughout history. I call it put paper in front of the gold. So it used to be a lot of people passing around gold, and it's like, oh, it's so difficult to secure gold. It's heavy. You have to measure it. What if it's fake? I mean, just look at all these difficulties with gold. You don't need the gold. Just let us hold on to the gold for you. And here's a picture of your grandpa on a piece of paper. It's very well decorated, and it's just as good as gold. You can come pick it up at the bank anytime you want. It's just as good as gold, and don't worry about it. There's mostly, the entire thing is represented. There's no gold in there. I'm sorry. There's no gold, but there's some silver. Actually, there's oil in there. Actually, I'm sorry. There's none of that. It's just the full faith and credit of the U.S. Government. I mean, military. I mean, bombs. Yeah. So, the story just kind of just like the goalpost just moved. If you zoom out and look at it over decades, it was basically like you're getting robbed blind, but because they talk like your dad, we're inclined to trust them because we love our dads, and the money has a picture of my grandpa on it. I mean, I can't tell you how much I love my grandpa, and I love having pictures of him around. So, but it's not my grandpa's money at the end of the day. It's just a picture of him. It's not really my grandpa. And just like this ticker symbol BTC is not the idea of Bitcoin. And so I think the most important thing about Bitcoin, more than anything, more than the decentralization or is actually the fact that it was open source. Somebody figured out how to make a monetary system, and they put the instructions out on the internet for any engineer who cared to learn and tinker with it and build their own. So we're not going to put the genie back in the bottle. The idea of making your own currency is fully distributed across the planet. There are hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions, who now know how to make their own currency. And when before it was just a tiny handful of people, like elite families that went to elite schools and who knew how the money system works. Now it's out in the open, and it turns out it was actually pretty simple the whole time. It's like just very simple rules. Like if you look at an ERC20 contract, it's like the whole meat of it is just the transfer function. It's like you just take it out of one account, make sure there's enough, and then you put it into the next account, and make sure you check the digital signature so it's theirs, and don't create more money that didn't exist. And that's it. That's the whole thing. And meanwhile, you can go to school for decades and get tons of debt to learn about how all these layers of abstraction in the financial system work, and it's just a whole bunch of horseshit distraction. Even a monkey would throw the money on the ground if you realized that you were cheating. And yeah, counterfeiting is illegal because for the same reason that central banking should be illegal. And so that's where I'm coming from. BlackRock is central bank. I mean, what's the BlackRock? Is this a giant, black cube of the cult of Saturn? What's with this weird symbolism?
No, I don't know. Tell me
Oh,
more.
you don't know? Yeah. So I mean, there's this. Okay. I mean, there's this. Look, I can't claim to be an expert on this stuff because I only have a certain stomach for it. But if you want to look into this, like, go read about the cult of Saturn, and they have certain symbols that they know each other by, and one of them is a black cube, and but Saturn is like related to Satan, and mythologically there's a kind of resonance between, there's also like the whole circumcision connection with Uranus, Ur-Anu. And so, I mean, people say the world is ruled by symbols, not by humans. And I do think that there's different ideologies on this planet. People have different things that they think are good and different rules that they live by. But anyway, so I mean, this is, kind of going off on a deep rabbit hole, but yeah, I think, so the main threats I see to Bitcoin are, one, the throughput. I agree with Shai 100%. Like, how, we should have had 1 billion people using Bitcoin by now. We actually had a chance at that. We could have sailed off into the sunset before the central bankers and the governments had any idea what was coming, because it was so useful and so simple. And and all the big players started adopting it. We had Steam and Microsoft and Tesla, and it was like, oh wow, this is the new thing. Wow, just like, and instead, we aborted that, and now they've had time to catch up and start making all these rules, and increase the surveillance, and also improve the banking system, so the crypto system is not 100x better than banks now, and so we lost a lot of time. We're not on that sort of happy timeline, but I think we're still in the game, and so so that's the main thing. I think you need people to be able to use the base chain. This reintroduction of trusted third parties like the ETFs and the exchanges and everything is a direct byproduct of the throughput being artificially constrained. And look, I'm an engineer. Bottlenecks are generally uncontroversial. Once it's like generally an empirical thing. You figure out where the bottleneck is, and then you release it. And maybe if you're trying to be conservative, you don't release it too fast because you're not sure if something else is going to break, and you're going to run into another bottleneck. It's not the last bottleneck. But to me, the real inheritor of the spirit of those sort of big blockers, if you will, is actually Solana. They were just like, no, like fuck this whole layer 2 thing. It was the layer 2s are parasitic on Ethereum. And so just make the base layer as beefy and fast as possible, and let the philosophers cry about decentralization. Because at the end of the day, decentralization seems to mean whatever the core priests say it means. There's no concrete metric other than the number of nodes, which everyone knows you can just spin up a bunch of nodes. And what about the number of different implementations? Or every distribution, statistical distribution could have this decentralization or Pareto coefficient attached to it. So I think the narrative around Bitcoin is very constraining. It's artificially constrained, not just at the block space level, but also there's a kind of Overton window of like what you're allowed to talk about without getting called a retard, And so yeah, so the throughput is the main thing. I'd say that privacy is another huge issue. I love that Zcash is getting its time in the sun right now. I think it deserves it. They've basically created the whole zero knowledge field. But also, I think the big kind of guillotine hanging over Bitcoin's head is quantum security. And again, the technology is not the bottleneck. I mean, the first version of Quantus, our chain, was actually a Bitcoin fork, and it's open source. I can give you the link to it. I just made a new address type. So Bitcoin has multiple address types. That's crypto agility or account abstraction, which it took Ethereum to figure out many years. But so we just made a new address type and put in Falcon signatures, and it took me 2 weeks, and it was I was already familiar with the Bitcoin source code, but the technology is not the bottleneck. It's the people and the decision making, and like we don't even know if all these Bitcoin influencers even hold Bitcoin. Like, they have this tremendous say about it, but there's no we don't know how much skin in the game they have, and we certainly don't know what other exogenous incentives they might have. And so, if you're going to trust somebody to decide for you, you really need to know like what consequences that person will face if they make a bad decision. And so look, I mean, uh, also, people, I think there's this kind of implicit assumption in the community that the public timelines for quantum computing are 100% accurate. And one, even if we assume good faith from everybody, you never know when a new technology is going to be developed. It's not a predictable thing, because you look for breakthroughs. It takes a moment of genius and creativity or just luck in order to find something. And also, there's no reason to think that we're going to be informed when these big corps can suddenly break into 90% of deployed cryptography worldwide. I mean, quantum computing is highly relevant to cybersecurity and therefore national security. And so you can bet your ass that all the Google and IBM engineers who are working on this have security clearance and are told to shut the fuck up if you find anything really important.
Oh man, that escalated so quickly.
So I'm getting fired up, bro. It's like I need to take a little breather.
There's someone in the chat who said, "I don't know where this is going, but it's hot."
Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening. But yeah, I don't want Bitcoin to die. But like if you would sit around and wait for BlackRock to tell you when BlackRock just read. I'm sorry, I'm yelling. BlackRock just led a $1 billion investment round into PsiQuantum, a photonic computing company. And meanwhile, they've got this ETF with billions of Bitcoin in it. And you should go read those. If you're excited about this stuff, you should go read their documents. They're all public, and they say things like, hey, if a quantum computer comes, like that could be detrimental to the price of this ETF. But they also say, in the event of a fork, they'll pick which one they honor. So that's a lot of power. Someone has $100 billion worth of Bitcoin, and then they get to pick which fork wins. It's like, okay, are they going to introduce a fork? Or is one of their partners going to introduce a fork? What happens if there's a crisis? And there's, oh, guys, listen, it's time to let the adults take control here. We tried the whole peer-to-peer decentralized thing, and you guys just aren't mature enough. I mean, look, you can't even figure out the filter thing. It's time for the adults to manage your money.
Then again, so Bitcoiners say about Ethereum proof of stake that basically the stable coins are in control, and it doesn't matter what the stakers want. It's the stablecoin companies like Tether or Circle that actually control what's going on, because without them, the chain is worthless.
I think it's a little overstated, but it's a very similar argument. I think it's valid. I think it's directionally correct. Money is not the only thing that matters, but it does matter a lot. And this idea that the existing players are just going to disappear because we have this new technology, I mean, that never happened. Like the Catholic Church didn't die because the printing press was invented, but they did lose a lot of power. So I think that's the analogy here. Is even Satoshi himself said, Bitcoin is not a silver bullet. It's just going to buy us some time. And I think there was a lid was closing on humanity. There was going to be a kind of final solution where are the chickens ever going to rise up against the humans? If in 1,000 years are the chickens ever going to get organized and overtake the farm? We all read Animal Farm, I'm sure. So there is a kind of power differential that could increase so much that it might be just inescapable for humanity. And I think we avoided that. We're not on that timeline, but thanks to Satoshi. But it's the game is not over yet, and so don't get fucking comfortable, guys. All right.
I do like that you're playing along your marketing term, which is weaponized. My light just died. I'm gonna have to fix it. Which is weaponized schizophrenia, because a popular term which Elon Musk himself promoted at some point is weaponized autism. It was during his Doge days when he was getting a bunch of very young people who are probably on Adderall to look through the government files and identify everything that was maybe overspending or something irrationally suspicious or whatever. And you're promoting schizophrenia, which goes beyond this. It's about imagining something that may not be there, but how can you be sure that it's not really there?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting way to put it. I mean, medically, the term schizophrenia is kind of a catch-all for a very large variety of phenomena. And it's sort of like, fungi obscurata, in the sense that, there's like, I don't know what's going on in here, so we're just going to draw a boundary around it and give it a name so we can, keep our jobs. But but it was inspired by this term, weaponized autism, and I'm a former denizen of 4chan, and I certainly appreciate the benefits of being obsessed with details. I would say that I'm mildly autistic. I think I used to be more autistic, but actually LSD, large doses of LSD, helped treat it. I'm much more able to relate to people now instead of just speaking in math symbols. So that was that sort of transformation from highly antisocial autistic person to like more social, more extroverted, but still detail oriented person. I think that's what the term weaponized schizophrenia captures, because if you study like machine learning or like signals intelligence sort of thing, where like you have this notion of false positives and false negatives. So if you're like trying to classify phenomenon, like, is this a cat or is this not a cat? And so there's two kinds of failure modes. One is where you thought it was a cat and it's not, or you thought it wasn't a cat and it actually is. And so those are false negatives and false positives. And in many situations, one of those will be sort of worse or more important than the other one. And so, but like in say science, they publish scientific papers and they talk about the null hypothesis, and they sort of, the p-value has to be below some kind of threshold in order to reject the null hypothesis, right? And so the p-value being sort of like, if our model is true, how weird are these results? And meaning, like, if the results are weird enough, we're going to have to update the model. And this is the essence of science, is that you don't just sort of beat people over the head with your dogma. You take in feedback from the environment and make your model more accurate. It's essentially just learning. But this threshold, of how far down the p-value has to go before you reject the previous model, that threshold is arbitrary. And you can see this because, like, in medicine, they have a p-value of 5%. So the drug's effectiveness has to be like better than a 1 in 20 in order to be considered statistically significant. But that threshold's arbitrary, and because in physics they have the same p-value system, but the threshold is way, 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 way lower. It's much closer to zero, because they have more control. They can do many more experiments for the same amount of money. And so the fact that this threshold is arbitrary, that's interesting. So what happens when you change this threshold? If you loosen the conditions for which a fact is considered to be statistically significant, well, then it changes your false positive and false negative rates. You get more false positives, but fewer false negatives. And so, and people's brains are tuned to different, I'd say, statistical significance levels, because some people are, their brains connect things more easily than other people. And that's not necessarily like more incorrect way to think. It comes with its own set of advantages and disadvantages, because many phenomena are quite diffuse. They're still important. There's still important patterns in nature that don't occur frequently enough to be studied within the regime of a 5% statistical rate. And so, but also there's lots of kind of like false positives or hallucinations, if you will, when you connect things that shouldn't really be connected because it was just a kind of coincidence. And so likewise, on the other side, if you're, being too autistic and too detail oriented, be like, well, actually the semantic, and being obsessed with like precise definitions of words, I think has its own failure modes, where like somebody can basically control you by just redefining your words without you noticing. And I feel like that's basically what happened with Bitcoin, is they identified, the community cares about sound money, decentralization, and okay, well, we're going to make, what's the most vague of these words? Maybe decentralization. Okay, let's make it mean whatever we want it to mean. Well, let's make it mean that Bitcoin can't scale. Let's make it mean that fees have to be high. Make it mean that throughput has to be low. And I don't think this is what people actually meant when they said they wanted it to be decentralized. I think they meant we don't want one party having unilateral control over the money supply, because that's basically everyone ends up working for them, and that's a form of slavery, and it completely defies the concept of money. So anyway, I'm kind of rambling here, but that's where the term, that's my interest in schizophrenia, is that it's actually like being able to change the significance threshold in your brain, be like, okay, I'm going to blur my eyes and kind of zoom out and see like, okay, what does this look like in broad gestures versus like, let me zoom in and see like, okay, let me look at the details. Both of those are valid and important ways to look at things. And so I was quite inspired by, this blog I wrote, Weaponized Schizophrenia, was largely inspired by Douglas Hofstadter's book, Gödel, Escher, Bach, where he would have this alternation between kind of like the chapter would first be written in a left brain style and then in a right brain style. And so he would, it was more like science and like math and, technical terms. And then it would be like a poem, a dialogue written about music, but it's still expressing the same idea from these two sides. I thought it was a very creative and inspiring book, even if it was quite long-winded. And so that my blog was meant to sort of, riff off of his baseline, if you will.
Man, you're so much fun. Anyway, I gotta present some ads.
Okay, cool.
I'll start with Bitcoin.com news, which I just checked to see if there's any news about Quantus, about the release of Quantus that got published. I guess not yet. But basically, the good news about Bitcoin.com news is that they sort of went from green to orange. Maybe you're not going to like this, Christopher, but there used to be this outlet that was covering Bitcoin Cash exclusively, and they were saying, well, you shouldn't use BTC because it's slow and expensive. And now they sort of went along with the market. And they also have a pretty good range of topics that they cover, unlike many other outlets around, which tend to be either too American-centric or too focused on financial institutions like CoinDesk. And they sort of miss the spirit of this community. And sometimes I find this on Bitcoin.com news. So I recommend the listeners to check it out from time to time. It's really good. And also, which one should I pick? Let's pick Citrea, which is launching later this year. It's the first optimistically verified ZK rollup on Bitcoin. It's something that basically will bring Ethereum to Bitcoin, but by inheriting the security properties of Bitcoin's base layer. The way in which they will operate is to use the BTC base layer as a data availability layer, which some Bitcoiners don't like, but honestly is much better than putting JPEGs and actually pays the miners, which the hardcore hodlers who are saying that Bitcoin should be kept for transactions while not scaling are not, because they don't really use Bitcoin. Anyway, my point is that Citrea is basically trying to tap into WBTC, into that, I think it's 100,000 Bitcoin that's locked on Ethereum using BitGo. And they want to bring that to a more native layer, which also has better security and more trust minimization. And also, they can even have a Tornado Cash fork and all the cool stuff that Ethereum has, which I find interesting. And yeah, they have their testnet, which has been running for a year now, and they are ready to launch this year. Spoiler, I was actually invited to be part of their ceremony for launching the network. And I think there's going to be like 100 people or something, so my role is going to be insignificant. But anyway, Citrea is CITREA.xyz, and they will be launching later this year. And I'm also going to talk about BIP300 drive chains, which can be another way to bring features to Bitcoin and scale it with minimal trade-offs. And the way in which you can do this is either with BIP300 or with covenants, but covenants grant you fewer protections for the users. And the whole point of drive chains is to have a sidechain for every interesting use case out there while only using the 21 million Bitcoin that's in circulation. So you can have a sidechain for Ethereum, one for Zcash, one for domains and tokens, one for prediction markets. They even have one which is a big block version of Bitcoin that gets pruned every few months so that it doesn't bloat in size. And you can check out their software at layer2labs.com/download. It's running on the Bitcoin Signet right now. They're able to make it stable. It's pretty cool. I love Paul Stortz. He's a genius in lots of ways, and he's always ahead of his time, and he's tragically ahead of his time because a lot of people don't understand what he's saying. But I think he's right in his intuition that Bitcoin relies more on game theory than actual cryptographic security. And he assumes that most miners are honest with drive chains, and I find that interesting. And I'm curious if you have any opinion about any of this.
Well, you know, I look, I'm a hacker. I love, and that term originally means using computers in a creative way without regard to what the manufacturer intended, right? So you read the manual and then you do something the manual didn't tell you to do. And uh, and so I love that people are being creative with Bitcoin. I think this is like that's what makes it a living object, is that, you know, people are, it's like a tree and there's like other plants growing on it, and uh, and so you know, I have my own opinions about architecture, you know, as a systems designer myself, and there's also, you have to take into account the practicality of like, well, people are already using this thing, so how do we you know, move forward with you know, with the minimum amount of effort. So, you know, I generally think the L2 thing introduces a lot of complexity and makes unfavorable security trade-offs. Uh, you know, I think, you know, if you dig into Ethereum, it's enormously complex. You know, and it started out fairly complex, and then it kind of exploded in complexity with all the L2s. And I think it, you know, in retrospect, it was a mistake. I think they ended up becoming parasitic on Ethereum. And in a similar way, I think Lightning Network has not delivered on its promises. Took way too long to build and is still too hard to use. And so, you know, having you know, but I would encourage everyone to play. This is an open source ecosystem. You know, I could be wrong. Maybe somebody's going to nail it, but it's not just about the technology. Like, how do you get people to use your thing? Is an incredibly important part that I think a lot of the autists, the kind of like hackers or, you know, computer scientists in the space, focus too much on the technology and not enough on the people and social aspect. And so you know, it's there's other chains out there, other blockchains exist, you know, so it's, you know, you're not going to be able to just meme them out of existence with some kind of holy war online. I mean, it's a uh, you know, I think it's good to stand up for what you believe in and advocate for the thing you think is right, but you don't get any taller by cutting other people's heads off. And this sort of like not in my backyard mentality is exactly opposite of what the whole open source ecosystem is about. And just as a thought experiment, imagine if Bitcoin were not open source. Everything would be different. It would be like a banker coin where like only certain people could mine it, and only a few, like, you know, whitelisted players would be allowed to make wallets because nobody knows how it works, and it would just be basically New World Order coin. So the fact that it's open source is absolutely critical to its status in the world now. It would not be credibly neutral if it were not open source. But open source comes with a cost, and that other people can steal your idea and be creative with it in a way that you didn't approve. And so, you know, you kind of have to you know, learn to live with the other creatures in the jungle if you want to make something big.
Yeah, I think even Satoshi had to face this consequence when Namecoin was launched. At first, it was called BitDNS,
Mm.
and they were planning to put this on Bitcoin. And he said, well, you should create another blockchain for that and merge mine it with Bitcoin so that the miners can get rewards from both networks. And I think, to be honest, like, Satoshi was a lot more reasonable than a lot of these modern Bitcoiners are when it comes to other blockchains. It's almost like these religious zealots who are saying, well, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. And then you point out to them, well, Jesus did that too. And they get angry.
Sure. Yeah, it's well, and I think, but Namecoin, I remember Namecoin, it was a cool project, and it was quite like, fitting DNS into the UTXO model is quite awkward. To be honest, ENS is a much more elegant solution, and ENS I think ultimately got more adoption, but still not that much adoption. Like I'd made a search engine for ENS at some point, and there's a very small number of names have been claimed, and a very small number of people have attached websites to those names. So it's mostly a place for people to store their crypto address, which, I mean, okay, maybe that's useful. But it's the UTXO model, in my opinion, is not the ideal structure for this. It comes with a lot of drawbacks, and I think it's inherently puts non-fungibility into the system, and that's why the ordinals thing happened. You couldn't have done ordinals with an account system like Ethereum, but then Ethereum has all this programmability where you can explicitly, create NFTs, and the code does exactly what it looks like it should do, instead of having to be used creatively in order to shoehorn in the use case you want. But a lot of this debate is, I think, there's a lot of confusion about what is information. And I think to me it's instructive to study the one-time pad. It's sort of the simplest encryption system, but it's also in some sense the most perfect. Assuming you can pre-share a key, then I take my message and I XOR it with the key and I send it to you, and then you XOR it with the key and then decrypt it. And it's sort of what makes this kind of perfect is that if somebody had a different key, then it could decrypt to a different message. So if somebody's eavesdropping, you can leave them the wrong key and they decrypt it, and it correctly decrypts, but now it says something completely different. And so any message is potentially contained in this ciphertext, and so it shows that the information isn't really in the thing itself, or at least not in isolation. It's a kind of conspiracy of context and subject that creates this experience we call information. And so, oh, I don't want you to put this thing on my blockchain. It depends on how you interpret the bytes. And there's no way to get away from that. Somebody could put something that looks like random bytes to you, but it's actually encrypted. And and so some people, I think, just have a deep instinct to be extremely tribal and attack people who are in their out group. It's a basic human instinct, and I don't think it's wrong, but sometimes it causes more problems than it solves.
Well, yeah, there are lots of narratives floating around, and once again, the reason why Bitcoin didn't have to learn or didn't have to adapt is that the price went up. And sometimes I think I had this conversation with Chris DeRose like 5 or 6 years ago. I think it was 5. And it was around the time when Michael Saylor landed on the scene and he started buying. And his reaction to this was, they're paying us to leave. That's what he said. Basically, we're getting some US dollars to feel complacent and be like, yeah, this isn't so bad. And then we get our Lambo, we get our home, and we're like, maybe this peer-to-peer electronic cash thing was just a dream. And maybe it doesn't matter. I compare this a lot to the hippie movement, right? Because these people really wanted to change the world, to end all wars, to screw corporations and everything. And now we're getting ruled by them. Like some of the highest officials in our governments are boomers who actually believed in those ideals. And they're not representing any of that anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting how these things go. Of course, as you get older, your hormones change and your testosterone goes down, and you acquire some assets and you get more comfortable, and maybe you have kids, you have a wife, and you have more to lose. And I don't take the same risks that I used to when I was a kid. I was very brave and clumsy and just hurt myself, like leaping off of edges on a skateboard. And doing all kinds of things that I wouldn't do now. But yeah, and the
That's
system,
called
or
grinding, and you're still grinding. I can argue that you're still
sure,
grinding, but in a different way.
I put my body on the line less often. Like I look for higher ROI, activities to spend my testosterone on. Um, but yeah, there's the system, that people want to change is alive, and it has a way of absorbing its critics, and and I think the financial system is not any different. People like to think, like, oh, the people on top are stupid because there's this stupid thing in the system, but like, everybody wants to be on top, and only a few people actually make it on top, and so there's a very strong selective process to get on top of the pyramid, so to speak. And I think a certain cutthroat disposition is one of those traits that it gets selected for. Another one is high intelligence of a certain kind. Being able to understand people at a social level, and manipulate people's emotions, and uh, you know uh, control people with incentives like money or sex or threats of violence. um, and so I think there was a bit of growing up that I think we all had to do as Bitcoiners in order to really get what we were after. And part of that is like, I think, confronting our shadow, and like, oh, those greedy fuckers, they just want to enslave the world and like have everybody just work for them. And it's like, no, we all have this inside of ourselves. Our organisms want more energy, more power, and like, we live in a jungle with other creatures, and there's like, and you can just be happy too without like enslaving everyone. That's like another way you can live your life. So uh I just I looking back, there really was a different vibe. I remember I went to a Bitcoin conference in San Jose 2014,
That one
and
was legendary.
it
It's
was
the one where a lot of people met each other for the first time in person, and a lot of projects were born there. Like Rootstock, for example, on Bitcoin was born there. It was also where I think the main criticism of Zero Coin / Zero Cash, the paper for Bitcoin, was presented by Peter Todd, and after that, it hasn't happened. It was really
yeah,
big. Like
it was.
back in the day, the impact of conferences was much higher than today. Nowadays, you have one every month, and it feels like just like the other one.
Yeah, and now if you go to like Token 2049, it's like, it's mostly business guys. There's not a lot of hackers there. There's not a lot of like revolutionary spirit there, which is okay. The thing is evolving. But I remember this conference in particular, I had never heard of XRP. And so, but like, I'd say, I don't know, maybe there was a fourth or a third of the people there were like just these like fast talking Wall Street guys in suits who were like shilling XRP and be like, don't worry about Bitcoin. That's not going anywhere. XRP is the next big thing. Look, XRP is for banks. And and it was such a contrast in like the vibe between, the Bitcoiners and the XRP people. And but they learned how to sell it to a lot of people. A lot of people bought into the XRP narrative.
To me, it's
And
fascinating with XRP because every cycle they come up with the same claim that they're gonna replace Swift and they're gonna be used by banks and blah blah blah. And the next wave of newbies buys into it and takes the price to like $3. That seems to be like the top every time. And then it just goes nowhere, and it's very unclear what happened in their first few blocks. They're apparently lost forever. And it's also
so
very unclear what's happening with their monetary supply, because at one point they said that they own like, I think their supply is 100 billion or something, and that they released like 40 billion on the market, and they're holding strategically like 600 billion or whatever.
those are some
60,
big.
sorry, if it's 100 then it's 60. Basically they were holding 60% of the supply just to get
Yeah,
released later. And it's unclear how this works. Like, they have no accountability. And then they say, well, running a node is permissionless. But then if you look at the documentation, you need to be approved by the Ripple consortium, whatever, to be in consensus. Like, they have to vet you.
Yeah, I think they were these guys were smart, they were fast, they moved fast, and they created this and they seized the opportunity to be early on in Bitcoin, and but also to make their own thing and take advantage of the narratives that were floating around. I mean, it was basic especially during COVID. There was this streak of like any conspiracy video, that about anything somehow related to XRP. Like they managed to link every conspiracy to XRP, and it was like, and people were naturally like asking lots of questions about like what the fuck is going on, questioning their assumptions about how the world works, and XRP was right there to give them the answers and be like, don't worry, like XRP is going to save the day. This is going to be the new financial system of the world. Daddy's going to save you. And and I always tell people, look, you might make money on it, but I wouldn't I wouldn't I wouldn't touch it.
To me, it's so silly. Also because it never really improved in any way. Like, it feels like such a stagnant project that just pushes the same narrative over and over. And they say they have partnerships with all of these banking companies, but what they do is sell them some technology which apparently they don't even use. And the XRP token is basically just a way for them to fundraise to keep going. But they're doing a lot of lobbying, which to some extent is detrimental to Bitcoin. For example, their campaign, which was called Change the Code and was paying Greenpeace to ask Bitcoin developers to switch to proof of stake with these protests and billboards and artwork and whatever. But maybe that they also go to Washington. No, I think overall Ripple was a negative to Bitcoin because they were, at the time when most of the mining was happening in China, they were saying, well, but we're made in the USA and Bitcoin is Chinese. Bitcoin is controlled by the Chinese. You cannot trust it.
Yeah, it was, it was definitely in a zero-sum game with Bitcoin. It early on framed itself as opposition to Bitcoin, and I think I understand competition, and competition is can be, it's like interference. It can be both constructive and destructive. If and but really, like, some self-awareness really helps. Like, all the Bitcoiners, or let's say crypto people, are in a very tiny little bubble, and crypto is still a very small piece of the pie compared to the global economy. And so, you know are we going to win more by fighting each other over breadcrumbs, or are we going to win more by sort of teaming up against this much larger foe that's admittedly more difficult to fight? So, and of course, you don't get on top by being a dummy, and divide and conquer is a tried and true method of ruling. I mean, you look at how, like, say, England conquered India. India was much larger, much more populated, and yeah, England had superior technology, but they also understood how to turn brother against brother, and exploit small quarrels, inflame them, sell weapons to both sides, but sell more weapons to the weak side. And then when they win, it's like, oh, look, hey, you really owe us. Like, why don't you just, like, sit in our pocket for a little bit while we go to the next one? And uh and I, there's, but really, the in-person thing, I remember the early days of Bitcoin. It was like there were all these, vicious fights online that were just unbearable. I mean, it was just like who wants to spend time in a forum where people are just like name calling each other and seemingly intentionally misunderstanding each other? And then we go to these in-person events, and there was none of that. It was like, I mean, people still had disagreements, but it was very kind of like good faith, like, okay, I'm trying to figure this out, you're trying to figure this out, like, how do we move forward? And I love this term. I guess it's, who's the dark horse guy, Eric Weinstein. Anyway, I love this term sense making that he coined, because it's this like co-creation of information, of like, you steel man the other person's point of view to extract the truth of it. And I think our species would be 10x smarter if this was the norm online, if people were expected to take the best version of their opponent's arguments and address that, and instead of weakening their opponent's arguments. And it's not always easy to do, and also sometimes people are actually arguing in bad faith, and and so steel manning them doesn't always help. But really, there's a certain flavor of like a tone of voice that occurs when someone's trying to search for the truth, and it's quite different than when somebody is like trying to disrupt or stop people from sense making. I mean, there's I really encourage everybody who's interested in Bitcoin to go read the Gentle Person's, or I think they call it Gentleman's Guide to Forum Spies. It's online. It's on cryptome.org. It's on other places, but basically it's a some people say it's a leaked government techniques for disrupting online forums. And I think you can't help but, if you read this stuff, it'll just be like, oh, I've seen this before, and I would have never thought, of course, to do these things. But once you read them, it's like, yeah, actually, I can see why that would work. There's a science to disrupting online communities. There's a science to making sure that groups don't reach cohesion and come to agreement and consensus on things. There's a science to disinformation, to deflecting, people who are trying to catch your mafia doing something bad. So I think if people really want to be on the playing field with this stuff, we need to learn how to fight. And it's not necessarily picking up a gun, but it's really an information warfare.
Yeah, we should definitely get to the quantum part, because you said you only have 1.5 hours and we already spoke for 1 hour. And it's not necessarily related to the most interesting work that you are doing nowadays. Like, we can do some general commentary about stuff, but I'm not sure if it's the most productive way in which we can spend our time. I gotta plug 2 more sponsors and then we can talk about quantum stuff. First of all, actually, there is no order here. I'm just randomly picking them. But I gotta tell you about NoOnes.com, which is a peer-to-peer marketplace that's built by Ray Youssef, the guy who also co-founded Paxful and then said it's horrible and left the business and decided to build his own platform, which aims basically to empower the global south. He's focused on onboarding people from Africa, the Middle East, and South America to the Bitcoin economy. And if you decide to trade there, what you're doing basically is to provide liquidity to these lions from the global south who are very much into trading and into hustling their way with this new instrument that enables them more financial freedom. They also have a spot exchange. Basically, if you're trading with no ones, you're also giving liquidity to the global south. And they have a debit card for spending if you're into that. Personally, I'm not a fan, but if you do like the idea of using your coins through the Visa network, more power to you. Check out noones.com, which is the URL for no ones. And also, last but not least, SiteShift, which is the place where you can swap something that you have for something that you really want. So let's say that someone pays you in stable coins and we're in the middle of a bull market. You should not be holding onto that. And you want to get Bitcoin or Litecoin or Ethereum or whatever you find on the platform that you think is a better hold during the bull market or the long term, or something that you want to use. You go to SiteShift. Basically, you paste the address where you want to receive the new coins, like Bitcoin, and then you make the transaction to their USDT address, and boom, it's like magic. You're gonna receive what you want to your account or your wallet, and the fees are pretty low. The liquidity is good. Not available in the US, unfortunately, but there are workarounds if you really want to. Like, nowadays they ask you for ID to watch porn in Texas and the UK. There are ways to not put your ID there. I'm not gonna tell you exactly what means, but there are. Screw these governments. They don't know what's good for you. Anyway, quantum stuff. Like,
Okay.
we are constantly.
By the way, I just got a message. I actually have another half hour, so we have an hour.
Nice.
But tell me again. You were leading into something.
Yeah. So there is this looming threat for the entire industry that quantum computers are going to get built and crack the cryptography and be able to brute force private keys, and they're going to be able to basically make all of the popular cryptography that's being used in banks and also the cryptocurrency industry become useless and irrelevant. And there's also the other side of the coin, which is trying to build signatures and cryptography which resists quantum attacks. And to me, it's very fascinating. It's like a game where you have to prepare for your adversary, but I don't think any solution is permanent, right? Because it all depends on the capacity of the quantum computer. You can optimize to survive for like 20 years, but then you still have to research and find a way to stay ahead of the game, right?
It's true, and I think this is a topic where the details do matter, and it's very, it's a highly technical field, so there's a lot of sort of confusion floating around, and I mean, one basic fact about quantum computing is there's a large class of things it does faster, a bit faster. There's a very narrow range of things that it does extremely fast, and we're talking like super exponential speed up. And that narrow range of problems just happens to include the most popular asymmetric cryptography algorithms today, like RSA and elliptic curve. So that includes all of Bitcoin's signature algorithms. And so, cryptography is all about time barriers. The idea is like you could always grind long enough and find somebody's private key, but it may take you thousands of years or millions of years, right? So because of the, you can create these enormous search spaces by just adding more bits. And so then the question is like, well, can you narrow down that search space under certain circumstances? And the answer is yes. So quantum computing is not like, I mean, in some sense it's very magical, but it's not pure magic. There are certain things it can do and certain things it doesn't do so well. So one sort of red herring that people go after is the Bitcoin mining. They're worried about quantum computers mining Bitcoin, and what they're referencing here is, so using SHA-256 is a secure hash function. It's supposed to be difficult to reverse it, find a pre-image for a given digest, and so there's a quantum algorithm called Grover's algorithm, in which the easiest way to think about this is like, imagine you have an unsorted database, meaning there's no structure to it. Things are just randomly slotted in, and you want to find a particular element in there, or at least prove that it is in there. If it's truly unsorted, if there's really no structure, then you have to go 1, 2, 3. You have to go linear all the way through it, because there's no structure. There's no way to sort of zoom in on it. It's not like if it were sorted, that you could do a binary search and be like, well, is it in the middle? Okay, is it in the first half? Is it in the first fourth? And so quantum computers give you, there's Grover's algorithm gives you a quadratic speed up, meaning that instead of looking linearly, instead of looking at 2 to the 256 elements, you can do the square root of that, so 2 to the 128. So now, for reference, 128 bits is still a lot of bits of security. We're still talking about an absolutely gargantuan number of things to look through, and so the point is that basically, okay, if you're not deep into computer science, this may not be, it's not well-known ideas, but there's what they call complexity classes that algorithms fall into. And of course, each class has like sort of subclasses in it. But broadly speaking, there's polynomial time algorithms is like where most algorithms live, and it'll be like, oh, this is an n squared algorithm, or this is an n cubed algorithm, and that sort of tells you, how difficult does the algorithm get as you increase the size of the input. But then there's a set above this. So there's polynomial time algorithms, but then there's worse ones, or sort of more difficult ones. That would be exponential time. And then there's classes above it to be like super exponential, and it goes on. There's an infinite hierarchy of this, but in practical terms, we generally live in polynomial or exponential. And so finding the pre-image of a given hash is what Bitcoin mining is about. And because it's a cryptographic hash, there's basically no good way to shortcut it. So you have to brute force search through a ton of possible inputs until you find one that satisfies the condition. And so it's an exponential problem. You know, if you're 2 to the 256, that's an exponential number of things to go search. So if you apply Grover's algorithm, now it's 2 to the 128. It's still an exponential thing. So you haven't really left the complexity class. You've just kind of like made it a slightly easier problem within that complexity class. But really, to make it feasible, it needs to be down in polynomial land. And so Grover's algorithm. So that's one thing. It's only a quadratic speedup that you get with Grover's algorithm, and that quadratic speedup is like an asymptotic sort of measurement. It's not talking about. It doesn't take into account any of the practicalities of like how big is one step size, or what's the coefficient on this function. It just says like if you went out to infinity, which of these functions would be worse, and so there's something else that people don't talk about that much. So Grover's algorithm is also extremely impractical. So like, to run Grover's algorithm on Bitcoin mining, you have to do SHA-256 twice, and which means that you have to have billions of gates. And so now imagine if you have billions of gates, quantum gates, and you have billions of queries to what's called a quantum oracle. And basically what it comes down to is even if under extremely generous conditions, like if you have 0 error rate and you have like nanosecond gate times, you're still talking about years, many years, in order to mine a single Bitcoin with quantum miner. So compared to the classical miners are getting them in 10 minutes. So even under the most generous assumptions about what these quantum computers are going to do, which are very far off from like anything we know available today, it's not, the mining is not going to be happening on a quantum computer. That's just, it's not practical. So that's it. So hashes are not the soft target. And just to reiterate this, there are post-quantum signature schemes. So basically there are certain cryptographic algorithms that are resistant to quantum attacks. And one of the main primitives they use in these algorithms is cryptographic hashes. So these cryptographic hashes are a secure building block. You cut the number of bits in half, but that's okay. It's still a lot of security. And so the soft target is the elliptic curve signatures. And to give you a sense, so we talked about exponential, polynomial. There's something faster than polynomial, which is, they say, polylogarithmic. So it's like basically another, like, a logarithm is the inverse of the exponent. So you sort of like, you go have like an exponential difference between exponential and polynomial. Then you have another exponential difference to go into this even smaller or sort of faster complexity class. And anyway, the quantum algorithm that threatens elliptic curve signatures is called Shor's algorithm. And it's quite beautiful. It's elegant. I really encourage anybody who's interested in computer science to go look into the details, because it's like exquisitely beautiful. But it gives you a super exponential speed up on cracking elliptic curve keys. So it goes from being about an exponential time problem to get a private key given the public key. It goes not into polynomial time, but actually the one below it, which is polylogarithmic. And so it's a complete destruction of the time barrier that elliptic curves represent. And it's just, what this means is that it's not a situation where you can just add more bits to the key length. So there's some situations like, there were various cryptanalysis attacks against, say, like RSA or elliptic curves, which sort of like, it made it a little bit easier to grind on the key. And so you could defeat that by just adding more bits, right? Same thing with like Grover's algorithm. If you're really concerned about it, you can just add more bits to the hash. In this case with Shor's algorithm, you can't add more bits. That doesn't solve it. The thing is toast. And so fortunately, there are alternatives. There are other types of cryptography that don't rely on elliptic curves. And the most popular of those is called lattice cryptography. And this is also a quite beautiful. If you're into mathematics, if your listeners are like computer scientists, I really encourage you go read about lattice cryptography. It's actually quite beautiful. And the word lattice comes from basically crystals. So the mathematics of crystals. You have this like three-dimensional grid, regular grid of atoms, and that structure has been abstracted into a lattice, and you can then have high-dimensional lattices. So like you say 256 dimensions. And then the idea is that you can express this lattice in different ways, and there's inefficient and more efficient ways to express it, and that forms this public private key system. So anyway, I mean, we don't have to go all into all the details of that unless you think your listeners are interested. But the point is that there are types of cryptography that have been studied for decades, that exist, that have even been authorized by the government for the government to use. Which, by the way, so NIST, okay, so NIST is the National Institute for Standards and Technology. It's the U.S. government agency tasked with choosing what cryptography the U.S. government, and by extension much of the world, uses. And NIST has a speckled reputation. Let's say, I'm not saying you should trust everything NIST says. The Snowden documents revealed that they had they put a backdoor into an elliptic curve random number generator. There's also, they're very cozy with the NSA. The NSA would, of course, like to be able to break cryptography, but it's, of course, dangerous because a lot of people are just using the same cryptography that the government uses. So, so this is, you should apply a certain filter to whatever NIST says, but it's a big deal that the US government has been saying, hey, no new systems should use elliptic curves by 2030. And by 2035, no old systems should use it. Now, how do they know how this timeline is going to go? I mean, the answer is either they don't and they're just estimating it, or they already have the quantum computer and they're just leaking it out, dripping it out, and they know when they're going to release it. So in both those scenarios, it's better to be proactive in this, because the government may not tell you when it has the ability to break into your machine. They may not patch the vulnerabilities. And so they're telling internally all their agencies need to switch to lattice cryptography, or there's hash-based cryptography as well. So in some sense, like from an engineer's point of view, like when I made this Bitcoin fork, all I had to do was make a new address type and then swap out the cryptographic library for a different one. And so in some sense, it's not that crazy. Now, there are various trade-offs that you have to navigate, because the key sizes and the signature sizes are much larger. So the main reason the elliptic curves were so popular is because they're so small. You get these signatures that are less than 100 bytes. Your key size is 32 bytes. And whereas for lattice cryptography, it's in the kilobytes or thousands of bytes. So this is important for Bitcoiners to understand, because if we start switching wholesale to lattice cryptography, the throughput on the chain is going to drop by another factor of 10 or 20, maybe more, depending on what key size we use, because there's also different levels of security. And so, do you want equivalent level of security to what elliptic curves had? If so, you need more than the bottom level of security. So, So this is just broadly speaking, like this doesn't have to be an existential threat to Bitcoin, but if we wait too long, it very well could be. So again, the public key, not the hash. The public key is the soft target, and so when you send out Bitcoin, your public key is exposed. You have to reveal your public key in order to show that you made a signature that entitled you to move the coins, and so once you do that, your public key is sitting on chain on a public database forever. And so you can go, for example, to BitInfo charts has the top 100 richest Bitcoin addresses, and you can see how many outgoing transactions there are from each of these. And if it's more than 0, then that means the public key is sitting there, and that means that somebody with a quantum computer could crack those keys and take the funds. And you would have no proof that they did it with a quantum computer. By the way, it would be indistinguishable from someone stealing the private key through some other manner. So this is so that means that when Q day happens, even if it happens, you might not know it's Q day. It might only, like, historians might retroactively be like, oh, I guess that was Q day because we figured it out later. And The digital signatures are probably the single most important piece of Bitcoin. It's like Bitcoin would not be possible without public key cryptography. They also call it asymmetric cryptography. So basically, the ability to separate the roles of verification and proving into two different parties. This is really the kind of, I mean, public key cryptography is really the foundation for verifiable computing, which became the foundation for ZK. So basically, you can think of ZK as a kind of like generalization of this public-private key distinction. And so anyway, this public key, private key thing is a lot of people don't know how the internals of Bitcoin works. A lot of people are holding Bitcoin on just an exchange, and but they say not your keys, not your coins. Well, Bitcoin was believed to be non-confiscatable. But if the government has a quantum computer, then suddenly they can confiscate it. And so this is not something to be taken lightly. If you were the CEO of a publicly listed company that was worth trillions of dollars, you would take a 1% chance seriously. If it was an existential risk, you'd be like, no, we need some kind of insurance, or we need to be proactive about this. And Bitcoin is surrounded by its enemies. Not everybody wants Bitcoin to succeed, and so don't get too comfortable, guys. I've been talking for a while. Sorry.
No, it's all good. I think this was very useful for explaining exactly what it is that quantum computers can do to Bitcoin. The fact that we have the lattice cryptography, which is interesting. I've had a similar conversation with someone called Quick Beast on Twitter, and he is advocating for BIP 360 for Bitcoin.
Can you? I haven't read all the BIPs. Can you tell me which one this is?
So it's 360. Let me tell you exactly the title of it. It also has a website.
Okay, I'll look it up right now.
BIP 360. Bitcoin pay to quantum resistant hash. Crypto Quick is the name of the guy.
Oh, I have looked at this actually. I see now. Okay. Yeah, I mean, the only sort of pay to quantum resistant hash, I think, is a little bit of a misnomer, because it's not the hash that's quantum resistant. It's the signature algorithm, but it is the hash of a public key. So anyway, I'm just a stickler for names because it gets confusing after a while. But yes, so they choose, if I remember correctly, they choose a hash-based cryptographic algorithm, so not lattice-based, and it's a reasonable choice. There are so in some sense the hash-based crypto is making less. It has a smaller attack surface. Like if you just assume that the hash is actually a secure hash, then there's less attack surface, versus lattice cryptography has like a lot of, say, additional assumptions baked into it. So the trade-off there is that for hash-based cryptography, the signatures tend to be much bigger, as in like tens of kilobytes versus simply kilobytes. And so, is this the right or wrong way to do it? I don't know. I think this can be an option for people, and it's certainly, but what I think it's going to end up doing, what I actually hope it's going to do, is it's going to reopen the block size debate, because we're going to get this drop off in throughput, and it's like, okay, is 1 megabyte, really the one true answer forever and ever, or has networking tech caught up enough that we're willing to do more? I mean, guys, it's like 10 minutes, 1 megabyte every 10 minutes. And we really think about that, like how slow that is. We measure our connections to the internet in, megabits per second. And like good engineering is based on trade-offs. It's like, is node count a valid, important metric? Yes. Is it the only important metric? No. Right. So it's all about trade-offs. It's like, okay, if we lose one node because somebody's trying to run it on their Japanese toilet, and they ran their node on the Japanese toilet, but they won't be able to anymore if we slightly increase the block size. Like, but maybe that's worth it if we double the throughput of the chain. So of course, making these decisions requires a decision maker, and without a clear governance system, the decision maker ends up being glowy-eyed Bitcoin influencers. So, yeah, I would support something like this. This is a reasonable path forward. I would choose Lattice personally, but I think it's, this is a valid choice.
Also,
And
it's just one of the proposals, but it's the one that was formalized maybe in the most coherent way.
So I think that, and again, this is sort of the easiest part of it. It's the technical standard. Okay, you implement it. Let's say you manage to get consensus around it, and people, and people sometime in the next 10 years decide to start running this code. Okay, great. Now what do you do about all the coins in the old addresses? You have to migrate people, right? So this is where banks have a huge advantage, because they can update the cryptography and flip a switch, and now their databases and their websites and their mobile wallets, they all have the update all at once. Bitcoin cannot do that. There's no viable way to do that. So you have to manually get people to change. And so, okay, you could do something like, okay, all new transactions have to go into this new type, and you invalidate people sending to the old type. But then there's also this question of, okay, well, what about the keys that get lost? There's all these old Bitcoin addresses that were paid to public key, and there's coins sitting there, and, like, I don't know, the owner might be dead, or the owner might be in jail for the next 10 years. Who knows? The point is that not everybody's going to migrate. So then, okay, do we want this risk where, like, a quantum computer can come grab all these old coins and dump them on the market? It's like that's a pretty serious canary or honeypot to have. So maybe we need to fade out, or sunset these old addresses. But you can use whatever euphemism you want, but some people are not going to be happy about that. And you can bet that any of the opponents of Bitcoin who are watching this are going to take advantage of this crisis. This migration is going to be a weak point. It's a dangerous transition, and people will attack Bitcoin during this transition. And this is not going to be easy. I don't think it's impossible, but doing this in a way that keeps the faith in Bitcoin and also protects it against this new threat,
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting, because obviously it doesn't scale for everyone to move their coins to new addresses. And the only actual way in which this can work so that all coins are protected is to hard fork. But this assumes that users are going to switch to the new network.
Yeah, it's, I mean, it would be, this sort of, it doesn't scale thing. I mean, like, we can make millions of transactions. That would ease the transition, but we would probably have to increase the block size to get that done in a reasonable amount of time. It still doesn't address the old addresses issue, and there's probably going to be people, no matter how you pick which address gets sunset, there's going to be some false positives and false negatives in that selection process. And then there's naturally going to be, like, who gets to decide the criteria. And also, now that we have this mechanism, well, maybe we should use it to blacklist, all the bad actors, right? So is BlackRock going to have a fork, a quantum-resistant fork, to protect against the quantum computer that they funded, and be like, oh, look out, guys! All right, we're gonna have to fix Bitcoin for you, and don't worry, we're gonna make sure that protect you from all the child porn and the terrorists in North Korea and Oceania and the boogeyman under your bed, and everything bad is going to be fixed. You just use our fork. So it's a hairy situation, and I'm not the sort of person to just sit around waiting, which is why we decided to make our own chain.
Yeah, exactly. I was gonna transition into that conversation. You co-built or co-created Quantus. You take pride in the fact that you used only $500,000 with this project, when something similar in the industry costs a lot more, and you built it in 6 months or something. And it aims to basically have this base layer for quantum resistance and also zero knowledge proofs for scalability. To me, it was interesting. From the moment when I looked at it, I was like, okay, this is something. It sort of reminds me of what David Chaum was trying to build in 2018 with Elixir. I think that's the name of it. And then he rebranded into the XX network, and I haven't heard of it since. I don't know exactly what happened. But I do like this kind of experimentation. I think it's super useful. And your
Yeah,
mainnet is not live yet from what I've seen. You're still running on testnet, and you're launching next year, maybe?
that's right. Yeah, we're expecting Q1 of next year. You know, we're on testnet, our second testnet now. And yeah, you know, I mean, you know, I like to brag how fast we went, but to be honest, it's because of the open source ecosystem. It allowed us to grab parts from around the ecosystem and just focus on what we wanted to do that was novel. And we built on top of Substrate. So Substrate was the Polkadot project, but it was meant to be a blockchain SDK, meaning like a software development kit or a kind of, you know, do it yourself, pull the parts apart, you know, to build your own blockchain. And it was made by Gavin Wood, the co-founder of Ethereum. I would say he was really the sort of engineering genius behind Ethereum. You know, I think Vitalik is more of a, you know, visionary or mathematician. But so Substrate, you know, it has a bit of a learning curve, but everywhere we wanted to make an incision and change it, if we looked long enough, we found that there was already an abstraction layer there, and then we could just pop something out and put it in. You know, it already had account abstraction. We could change the consensus mechanism to be more like Bitcoin's, because we like proof of work, and so so, you know, we swapped out the signatures and we swapped out the consensus mechanism. It's now and we also had to make various changes to the chain to make it friendly to zk, because back when Ethereum and even Polkadot started, you know, Zcash existed, but it was very early moon math. You know, the whole field has gotten more digested now, and it's easier to understand, and there's tools that make it simpler to do. So so basically we changed like the storage mechanism to be more zk friendly, and we swapped out the hash functions to be more zk friendly. So we're using Poseidon 2 for basically everything. And so I think you know, our generally speaking, our plan was, look, what's our advantages of as a startup, you know, and me as a founder. There's we're good at going fast. You know, we're not as well resourced as these bigger chains, but hold on, I've got somebody knocking at the door.
Oh, this is thrilling.
What?
He went outside in the dark.
Who is it? Not right now. Okay. Thank you.
I guess he got some sort of delivery. Anyway, check out the sponsors of this show. Once again, Bitcoin.com News, Layer2 Labs, Noans.com, Hodling.ch, Sideshift.ai, Citrea.xyz. Are you back, Chris?
Yeah, sorry for that, guys. We had housekeeping. So anyway, so I really admire Eli Ben Sasson, the founder of Zcash and also Starknet. You know, he was really the sort of the godfather of ZK, and you know, something he said was like ZK is the right way to scale blockchains, and to do it right, you really need it at the base layer. So, you know, Starknet's an L2, and I know they made, you know, that decision for various reasons, but we're intending to sort of fulfill that dream as well, you know, and to me, the way to get around these big signature issues, because right now, so like without ZK, our chain has about 30 transactions per second, which is, you know, not terrible, but you know, at some point it will become a bottleneck. So how do we address that? Well, you can, with modern ZK techniques, you can do proof aggregation. So this was a technique I think founded by Sean Bowe, the Zcash cryptographer, who found out that you could make snarks recursive. I mean, of course, others contributed to this as well, but
Actually, Sean Bowe is going to be the next guest on the show, so
oh,
it's
is he?
funny that you
Oh,
mentioned
cool.
him.
Oh, that's cool. No, he's yeah, he's also somebody I really look up to. You know, just a real kind of homegrown genius. But so basically, because you can aggregate proofs, it means that we can take so basically okay, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. There's different ZK systems, and some of them are post-quantum and some of them are pre-quantum. And I use that term because in the future, all cryptography is going to be called post-quantum cryptography. They're just going to call it cryptography, and everything before will be in a museum and called pre-quantum cryptography. So like this is an inevitable transition that the industry is going to make, and it can be sort of either graceful or violent. And so Starknet had this buried in one of their repositories. They had a signature scheme for using Starks, and it turned out to be it was very simple. You just sort of prove privately that you own the pre-image of a hash, and then that's it. And of course you have to associate the message with it. But it was like I saw that and I was like, wow, this is so simple. This is so elegant. But the issue is that the proof sizes are like 100 kilobytes. So it's like, okay, this is really getting out of hand in terms of size. It's quite impractical. But you can aggregate these things. So you can have a tree of proofs where the leaves are all these individual, large proofs. But then you fold them and fold them and fold them until at the end you have just a single proof that could potentially represent, 100,000 transactions. And because it's using post-quantum ZK, it's based on Starks essentially, then you can have essentially a very cheap post-quantum signature scheme. And I think it's because one of the nice there's been so much work on elliptic curves over the years. We have the Schnorr signatures, which can be aggregated. You have this like built-in threshold schemes. There's all these nice tricks that you don't necessarily have in lattice cryptography or hash-based cryptography, and that may be discovered later, or maybe the system just doesn't even allow these things. But with ZK, you can stack these things, and I think ZK is the future. Like fully homomorphic is cool. Multi-party computation is cool, but really ZK is where it's at. This is like discovering fire. Like any computation can now be turned into a proof and summarized cryptographically by the prover and succinctly, quickly verified by the verifier. And it's just like, this mirrors so many things in our society, so many institutions where like, I don't know, you have like a court system and you go to court and you're suing somebody and like they have to defend themselves and the judge is sitting there trying to figure out what actually happened because everybody's like trying to lie, and also like, people don't, you can't sort of dive into the past and see exactly what happened, and sort of replay the computation yourself. So instead you have to kind of like interrogate the witnesses, and then be like, okay, prove that you try to catch them in a lie. And so ZK does this in a very, very elegant way. And, but as a general rule of thumb, if people are, like technical and interested in this stuff, is like generally if it touches elliptic curves, it's pre-quantum, and generally if it's only uses hashes or then it's post-quantum, and also the failure mode for ZK proofs is a little bit different. So with transaction signatures, with elliptic curve signatures, a quantum computer could steal your funds. It could forge a false signature. But with the ZK proofs, it could forge a false proof, which in the case of say Zcash, it would be an inflation bug. So it doesn't violate the zero knowledge condition, meaning they can't unmask previous transactions in Zcash. What they could do is create new Zcash, and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. So that's different from, for example, Monero. Monero quantum computer could one, steal your coins, but two, also de-anonymize past transactions. And so Monero has a worse failure mode against quantum computers than Zcash does. And Zcash, once they upgrade the ZK system to be post-quantum, then actually it's not an issue anymore. Whereas Monero has all these like old things to worry about.
Yeah, but if you say this on Twitter, you're gonna get attacked and called out for being a Mossad agent or something.
Yeah, I mean, well, to be honest, I mean, the Monero community is potentially more toxic than the Bitcoin community, and And if you take criticism that poorly, that's a sign that maybe like you need to reflect and reevaluate your life. Just
No, but
like
it works out for them. And it's exactly the kind of branding that keeps them on dark markets and makes people confident that this is good. Because as long as these people are intolerant and rude and aggressive, it's just a proof of confidence, right? And if they're confident, somehow that's all that matters. It doesn't matter if, for example, right now they're marketing Monero like they already have the full chain membership proofs, and they say, well, we have this and it's great. But in reality, they still have the ring signatures. And we have seen last year a video from Chainalysis in which they were showing how they can actually single out some of the decoys to get more information about what really happened with a transaction.
Yeah, I think the decoy model was quite creative. Look, I mean, I love when people take these like abstract cryptographic ideas and turn them into a product. I think that's awesome. I'm glad that Monero existed, but the decoy model is it gives you 4 bits of security. I mean, that's 2 to the 4th is 16, right? So you have 15 decoys, and one of them is real, and that's under perfect conditions. It assumes that the blockchain observer, the attacker, doesn't know which one is a decoy. And unfortunately, that's not always true. I think the simplest model to work through is imagine you're a state actor and you generate, say millions of Monero transactions to yourself, right? So you generate all these UTXOs, and then you include them into your own transactions, and so you know which one is a decoy and which one isn't, because it's been included in a transaction you made, and so therefore, anywhere else it appears, it must be a decoy. So now you just lost one of the decoys, and you can chop that off everywhere. And so it's just a flawed model, and I honestly, like, the fact that all the darknet markets have adopted is probably a negative signal. I mean, like, you should assume that a huge chunk of those things are run by the feds. Anybody can run a darknet market, including the feds. So be careful out there, guys. This is not like if you're trying to go like buy something online, I mean, look, I respect, you to do whatever you wish with your money and your body, but you're wading into a very dangerous place. Like, it's not all fun and games out there. Like, there's people with weapons and a very bad attitude who will have no problem lying to you in order to capture you and put you in a cage and do bad things to you. It's a jungle out there.
Yeah,
So
I've been super excited about Zcash making a comeback. I tweeted about it. I've been telling people, this could have been Bitcoin. We could still get this, the zero cash soft fork, which was proposed back in 2013 and has been improved so much over the last decade. Not too many Bitcoin people care anymore. They're still stuck in this filter war where they say, well, maybe that this transaction is better than the other one. Yeah, this is acceptable, but I don't like these JPEGs. Well, but these JPEGs can do this. Oh, cool. You can play Doom on a Bitcoin block explorer. Someone actually did that.
Well, to me, it comes back to this idea of Overton window. There's this sort of range of acceptable debate, which is set by the authorities, or in this case, it used to be the news anchors, but now it's the sort of influencers on social media. So you have this range of acceptable debate, and within it, you encourage very angry, vigorous debate, right? Say, oh, I want slightly more welfare. I want slightly less welfare. I want slightly more weapons to go to other countries. Oh, I want slightly less. But it's all within this like very narrow range, and but anything outside of it is forbidden, and you're going to be ostracized from the group. And it's like, you're a retard. Oh my God, you don't understand Bitcoin. Oh wow,
You're a heretic.
You're a heretic. It's all emotional.
I don't believe in the church. I don't trust that this is already perfect.
Yeah, it's this sort of like, ex officio kind of reasoning. And I mean, that's, I think it's worth remembering the word fiat was Latin. It's the first words in the Bible that God says, fiat lux, let there be light. It's like, fiat dollars, let there be currency, like, it's via authority, it's proof by authority. And so yeah, so I think this, like, fighting over filters is 100% a distraction. There are super important things for Bitcoin's future that are being ignored. And I think it's super suspicious. They got the Lightning co-author, I forgot what his name is, who says that quantum computers aren't going to happen in our lifetime. I'm like, how does he know that? But he's the guy who's going to work on the quantum fork of Bitcoin. And like, Lightning Network is a disaster for Bitcoin. I mean, from a usability perspective, the fact that the number went up is not a contradiction to that. It's we had a chance, and now we have to go the harder path. So, yeah, I don't know. Cybersecurity, nation states, cryptography, it's munitions, weapons. I mean, this is like before blockchain, like knowing about all this stuff meant you were probably so close to some military or intelligence agency. Like, this is not, these topics were not relevant to the average person, and now they're becoming relevant because of this like productization of cryptography. And I think it's amazing and exciting, but like, people have to understand this is warfare. This is mimetic financial warfare. And so don't just trust somebody because they talk really confidently about something. I mean, it's like, people, to me, what it really comes down to is actually people. There are a bunch of adults running around with the mind of a child. They're subconsciously, they never grew up. They didn't go through some rite of initiation or rites of passage where they became an adult.
You sound borderline Masonic right now.
There's certain value to that. There was the fact that became a secret thing instead of a public thing is the problem. There's tribes, where they still have their ancient initiation rites, from old times, and it's it's because people aren't really, there's no point where they are expected to behave like adults in Western society. You're expected to be dependent on the government and to listen to what the television says until you die. And so people are just looking around, looking for a dad. And there's some man on the television with he's very tall and good looking, and he talks like your dad. And he's going to take care of you and protect you from the bad guys and give you some money. And he's like, oh, that must be my dad. He looks just like my dad. And no, it's just some man on the television you've never met who doesn't give a shit about you. Who's just looks at you like you're a farm animal. And so, somehow we have to break out of this mindset, this childlike mindset that got us in this situation. But it's not easy, I think, and in these traditional rites of initiation, a lot of times people would die. Like, there's like some Native American tribes that all right, we're going to give you a bunch of peyote and throw you out in the woods naked for 3 days and see what happens, and like, not everyone makes it out. But the ones who do come back really fucking strong, and you can depend on them, and they don't sit around waiting for daddy to tell them what they can and can't do. So, I don't know how to make it out of this mess, but I do think that we need to be honest with ourselves that I don't think anybody's coming to save us.
Well, we should listen to Michael Saylor and Larry Fink and do the opposite mostly.
So Larry Fink loves me so much. Look, that's why else would he give me all this money,
Oh, you raised money from BlackRock?
No, I'm talking about Bitcoin.
Oh, Bitcoin. Okay.
Yeah.
That's our daddy.
Yeah. And but it's exciting. I'm happy to be here on planet Earth with everyone, and working through all these, this great adventure called life. But, we're all going to die one day, and none of this will matter. So let's not take it too seriously. Make sure we enjoy it.
I really don't want to end on this note. It's kind of depressing when you think about it. There is still hope, right? We're building stuff. We're running experiments. We're pushing the boundaries of what is known and what we thought was not possible just a few years ago. And we have the
Absolutely.
technology to do it, and we don't ask for permission to do it. The way in which you built Quantus, if I understand correctly, is that you used no bank accounts, you paid everyone with cryptocurrencies. You had everything on turbo mode, basically, without waiting for regulators to tell you that it's fine to build this, without waiting for any companies to get established, for lawyers to give you green light. It was just something that you did because you wanted to, and you did it in the only way that actually makes sense, by paying people directly and establishing a common goal for them to pursue something which is meaningful.
Yeah, I mean, I do like this model of like, okay, ask for forgiveness, not for permission. Definitely if you hire a lawyer and ask them if you can do something, they're probably going to say no unless you give me money. And I mean, people need to understand like the lawyers are that job, that role is inherently bound to the legal system. They're on the side of the king or the president. They stake their whole career on it. So, not to vilify lawyers, but like they're the ones who talked everyone into this foundation nonsense, which has also been a disaster for the ecosystem. Like everyone turns their token supplies over to a bunch of people who, oftentimes they don't know and are, or they just met recently, and then they have like for some reason are expected to have the right incentive to make the ecosystem grow. And I think occasionally it works out, if you choose the right people, but in general, it's quite bad uh, organizational structure. And I'm glad that it seems to be going away now. But no, I'm not fatalistic. I don't think the story isn't over. Um, but yeah, so we, I think I've done this before where we, run a startup entirely off crypto, and it's definitely easier now than it used to be. It used to be you had to really kind of bend over backwards in some situations to make things happen, and most people wouldn't accept crypto, even and now it's drifted quite a bit where like, okay, we'll accept stable coins, um, and Coinbase, for all the shit they get, they did make it pretty easy for like normies with accounting degrees to set up a crypto account, and so I'm grateful for that. And but it's I just I don't on my dad's side of the family, they're all lawyers, and I'm not a lawyer, uh, but I see how, I know how they think, and on that side of my family, like if you go back a couple of generations, it was all mafia. And so they just decided to like, sort of join the bigger mafia and like, button it up and like make sure you play by the rules that, the president wants. But it's the same shit. It's the same shit. It's all mafias everywhere. And it's certainly, I think some mafias are better to live under than others. I don't think all mafias are created equal, but we shouldn't delude ourselves about what these things actually are. And we also shouldn't assume that this is the only organizational principle available to our species. Parasitism is a very popular life strategy. Many organisms act from mosquitoes to birds to humans will behave like parasites, and it's a valid life strategy. Nature allows you to do that, but there's an alternative, and that's symbiosis. And in some sense, it's a more complex strategy. It's more challenging. You have to kind of be better at communication and be more flexible. And but it also, I think, leads to immortality. So you look at the fungus, right? You can get these like giant mycelium networks that stretch across like whole states in the U.S. And it's like, how would you ever kill that thing? But
Well,
it
that's
has a
how
very
slowpoke turns into slowbro.
Wait, explain that. What is that?
Oh, you're not into Pokemon.
No, I'm sorry, I'm not.
There's this very dumb and slow Pokemon which is called Slowpoke, but it
Mm.
becomes very vicious and dangerous when a clam basically bites its tail, and he basically starts walking on two legs and becomes actually dangerous, and his name is Slowbro afterwards. That's his evolution. And he actually needs symbiosis to be able to evolve. It's quite nice that I was able to learn this when I was 10 watching Pokemon.
That's cool. Well, yeah, and we are symbiotes. I mean, our like all the bacteria in your gut, much of it has different DNA than you, and yet it's quite essential for your health. And so like we are ecosystems. We're not just one organism. And and so this like sort of blockchain monotheism or maximalism is, I think, it's a kind of delusion. It's a kind of autistic obsession with categories and symbols that should be our tools. We don't need to become enslaved to a symbol. It's these are things that we create and help us navigate the world and communicate with each other, but you can change the meaning of things and you can rename things. It's a kind of magical power. That's Adam and Eve in the garden. You point at things and give them a name, but that's also mathematics, right? You'd be like, I don't know what this thing is, but if I did know what it was, then I would add one to it and now it would be three. So I'm going to name this thing X and like keep track of it as if I knew what it was. And so also in the brain, there's all this deep connection between like fingers, like manual dexterity, and symbol manipulation, but also throat manipulation. So it's like symbols, like you point at something, you give it a name, and now you can count it. And so I mean, I just bring this up because I think our species is very powerful in that it has this like obsession with language, and so we've cultivated this to a quite extreme degree, but also we've kind of, sometimes we really get enslaved by it. And it's like, just imagine trying to control a chimpanzee with a book, like, hey, you better do what I said, chimp. It says right here in the book, right? You'd be like, oh, wow, that's fun. Let me go eat a banana and have sex, like, and so like it's okay, guys. Like you can like turn off the language machine and come back, and you're still there. You go to sleep at night, and there's no words, and yet there you are, and you wake up in the morning, reborn, like Osiris, and so.
There's someone in the chat who said, I won the LSD this guy took.
Yeah, look, I mean, you know what's up, bro. So, I mean, I don't recommend anybody do anything illegal. And also, if you're going to start hacking in your brain, I would recommend caution and like, maybe do a bit of research and put yourself in a safe environment, because, increasing your neuroplasticity can be very valuable. And also you can accidentally program weird shit into your head. So I think, it's good to, like, I would not recommend most people go to a music festival and take a bunch of psychedelics. Like, I mean, people put all kinds of weird messages and the images and the music and stuff in these festivals, and they know that their people are like increasing their neuroplasticity and coming to listen to their music. And so, I think it needs to be done with like reverence. But yeah, it definitely can increase the flexibility of your mind. And I'll tell you, the music on my SoundCloud, a lot of it was improvised on different drugs. I mean, it was like, the album on my site called Stillness is based all on meditation, so there's no drugs. But other ones, the Chaos Magic one, it's all different drugs. And like, there are things I can do at the piano on drugs that I can't normally do. I mean, it's like this was what my PhD research was about. I was like, okay, what cognitive benefits can you get by sort of putting yourself in strategic situations and making yourself more neuroplastic? I had this concept that I was still quite interested in, called confusion tolerance. So the idea being that, like, okay, how do you learn like a child? Children learn so fast. Why can't I learn as fast as I could when I was a child? I want to learn faster. How do I become like a child again? How do I get that beginner's mind? And it's kind of counterintuitive, because in some sense, the child is more confused than you are, right? Because like, as an adult, I'd be like, I know the names of these things. This is a computer, and that's a window, and like that sound is music. And like, we have all these names, and we feel very comfortable with how knowledgeable we are. And when you're a child, you don't know what's what. You don't know what's supposed to be difficult, what's easy. So I had this idea that if you could increase your confusion tolerance, that then you could learn more. And my method for increasing confusion tolerance was a mixture of using certain drugs and also overstimulating myself with things like either like masturbation or but also listening to multiple kinds of music at once, or also like trying to do my homework while listening to the music while masturbating, just try to like just push myself out of this sort of sense of comfort and like knowledge into the sort of open space of wonder. And this is actually it mirrors quite beautifully, in quantum computing there's this thing called quantum key distribution. And the sort of principle behind that is that you can, I think most people are familiar with this idea that like you can collapse the waveform by observing the qubit, right? So you just like, it's in this superposition until you look, and then it collapses it, and then it stays collapsed. But it turns out that that's not the full story. There's another part, which is that you can pop it back into superposition by measuring it in a different basis, or another way to put it is like sort of changing the context of the question. And so you change the framing, and suddenly the thing will pop back into superposition, and now you get another probabilistic, say, roll of the dice. And so it's valuable to be able to collapse the waveform and be like, I know what that is. It's this. We're going here. I made a decision. Versus, it's also valuable to be able to pop back into superposition and be like, I don't know. This could be anything. Are you my mommy? So like,
I gotta give it to you, Christopher. You don't sound like a founder, like the average founder.
Okay,
You're not trying to sell me anything. If anything, you're trying to get me to try psychedelics. But my point is right now that you have a layer 1 blockchain to promote, and you're not really promoting it.
No, I'm I think we've built something amazing. I'm very excited for people to try it. There's, I could tell you about more of the features, but I think really, come in our group. We have a Telegram, so go to Quantis.com. It's the Latin word quantus, meaning like how much. So it's like this counting thing, and it's I think that if you stick around, you'll see that we make super fast progress, and we're trying to make very good design decisions to make the most perfect money that has ever existed. That's my goal. Am I going to achieve it? I don't know. But I don't hate Bitcoin. I don't hate any of the other blockchains, but I think I can do better. And so you want to come find out. You want to be early. You can mine it. We have a referral program. And we didn't even get to talk about this, but we have reversible transactions. And I know that's a sort of, some people, what does that mean? But I think we nailed the abstraction, because I think if you want a trusted third party, well, that's fine. You should be able to pick your policeman. So the way reversible transactions work in our system is you pick for how long it's reversible, and then you also pick who gets to reverse it. So that who gets to reverse it, it could be me. I could reverse my own transaction for whatever the period we agree on, or it could be I delegate that to some other third party. It could be a higher security wallet I control. It could also be I don't know, my family's trust. They have a multi-sig, or it could be I don't know, a stablecoin issue, or like I don't know, Visa, or I wouldn't recommend that, but in theory it could be anything. And so the idea is like, imagine Bybit, they have this like multi-sig, they have Gnosis Safe, and like, what a great product, Gnosis multi-sig. But $1 billion goes out, and it's irreversible. And like, by the time they realize that like that was not what they intended to sign, sorry, too late. What are you going to do? Stop the chain? So imagine instead if they had a mandatory wait period of 72 hours on it. Because like, if you need to spend money fast, keep it in your hot wallet. If you need it for your cold wallet, put some fucking ice barriers around it. And so the money goes out. They get to it gets scheduled on chain. So then everyone can go look and be like, wait, we weren't trying to send $1 billion to some random account. Okay, go fire up the other multi-sig with different hardware wallets and go reclaim the money and then figure out what happened. And so I think like so many thefts in this space could be avoided with this like fairly simple primitive. And so I'm quite proud of what we built. I think once people get their hands on it, it's I think it could be the de facto standard for the ecosystem. I expect people to imitate us. Another thing we've done to just make the crypto much easier for normal people to use is again, this is something we don't own. We didn't have to make our own chain to do this. I don't know why nobody did this before, but we call it a check phrase. So have you ever wondered if you're sending to the right address? Of course, right? It's like, I don't know, is this the right set of random letters? Like, did some malware swap it out in my clipboard? Like, I don't know, right? So, but also, what do people do? They also just read the first last few letters, because it's so hard to just read a bunch of like random nonsense, isn't it? So that leads to address poisoning attacks, where like malware can swap a lookalike address out, and you won't notice until it's too late. So what we do is we introduce a check phrase. So we derive 5 random words from your address using a cryptographic hash. And so basically, if you change even one letter in the address, you get a different set of 5 words. So 5 words is short enough that like you could remember it, you could call your friend up and say it over the phone. It's meant to be a human-friendly hash function, essentially. And and does it replace the address? No. If you're trying to send $1 million, you should read every fucking letter of the address. I don't know why I have to say this, but I do. Like, read every letter of the address if you're sending a lot of money. But a lot of wallets will even hide it from you. They make it hard for you to see the whole address. And it's just like, to me, this is a terrible design for security. You have to factor the human element into the security system. They are part of the system, and they're often the weakest link in the system. So anyway, so I think, we've also made open standards for HD wallets to use lattice cryptography. This was HD wallets, where you have a single seed phrase and then you derive many accounts from it. Well, that concept, that construction, is tightly bound to elliptic curves. And so if you switch out the crypto system, you have to change it a little bit. And we found a nice, elegant way to do that works with basically all the existing BIP39 libraries. And it wasn't that difficult, but we made the standard and we open sourced it. You can find it. We have QIPs, Quantus Improvement Proposals, and go read about it. And I'd be happy for other chains to. This is just meant to basically ease the transition into this new cryptography for our ecosystem. We've built a lot of cool stuff, but around elliptic curves, and we need to change that. So, I'm sure I'm going to get accused of being a shitcoiner and whatever by all the bots on, and Fed boys on Twitter, but I don't mind. If you look at what we're actually doing, you see we're quite pro-social to the industry. I like the whole Ethereum ethos of being friendly to each other, even though, oh, you're technically a different project, so now I need to like kneecap you because you're not on my team. No, like let's gang up on the central bankers and stop fighting each other.
I do like that. And I also remember Russell Bricht's speech from the conference that took place in Las Vegas this year, where he outlined how basically every blockchain makes the whole ecosystem more decentralized. And that's the kind of point of view that many of his Bitcoin-only followers found disappointing. And they're like, no, this guy was in jail for too long. He's confused. I don't think so. He's an old school libertarian. He gets it. And it's very foolish to ignore so much of what's happening with markets. I talk to people who only look at Bitcoin and that's all they care about. But they're missing out on so much that's getting built, and they are fine with it. They say, well, it's scammy anyway. It's just VCs pumping tokens, and it's not leading anywhere. Except that very smart people are funding some of this stuff to come back to Bitcoin right now. And to me, this is what Bitcoin maximalism is about. It's about trying to maximize what Bitcoin can do. It's not about saying, well, Bitcoin is at its maximum right now and we should not be improving upon it because reasons. And Satoshi left us with the perfect tools. That's bullshit. That was the peak of mid-2000s cryptography. It's been 20 years, almost. It would be very foolish to assume that nothing better has come out since then, and that there are not ways to make Bitcoin more efficient. Satoshi is on record for saying that if someone figured out how to do ZK proofs, a much more efficient version of Bitcoin could be written. And he was right. It happened, and it's happening. Of course, Bitcoin has this first mover advantage, has this what we call the immaculate conception, has a pretty good distribution that happened organically over many years. And it's very hard to replicate these elements. You can have a fair launch like Grin, which basically has no advantage to being an early adopter. It has the same emission and same inflation schedule no matter when you join. If anything, it's not made to pump at all. It's just made to be useful. You can have something like Caspa, which honestly is really impressive. I did a couple of interviews with the guys. They're super smart. The DAG concept is revolutionary, but I'm not sure if Caspa is going to be the one blockchain that pushes this concept. Maybe it takes more refinement and iteration. They mined this very fast. They tried to get to the ASIC phase as fast as possible. I guess it was good for the early adopters. Now they are seeing the returns diminishing and the community is getting more frustrated. The only way in which they can actually mitigate this is either if they get a lot of investors to buy the token, or else they get some sort of inflation and they keep up the high inflation rate until they get investors. But in its current phase, it's kind of stuck in a limbo. But my point is that we do have innovations and they are super interesting. And right now, I think I'm most excited about what's happening with Zcash because it's been cooking in the background for many years. And now we're seeing it just pop out in the spotlight. And people are confused and they're like, oh, it's a dead shit coin. We don't really have precedents for coins coming back. Maybe Dogecoin is a good example, but that's also a bad example because it came out to the top for all the wrong reasons. But in this case, there was this promise that ZK snarks are gonna be the best privacy solution, but Zcash, the project, has had a lot of fuck-ups. From the ceremony, which had an inflation bug that they had to solve, and then a lot of bad tweets, and the whole dev tax thing, which turned a lot of people away, and the fact that now they want to switch to proof of stake. I mean, politically, they did not do very well. But they built something which is really impressive, and they bootstrapped the entire industry on ZK proofs. And they had the libraries that anyone could pick up. It was actually funny because Fluffy Pony tried to dismiss my argument about ZK proofs and said, well, you're very misguided because Zcash did not invent the ZK proofs, and you should read these books from the 1980s, and you should read the book by Bruce Schneier on applied cryptography, and you're going to see that libraries have existed for a longer time, but they're not applied and they're not researched in a modern context. And for something
it was
which
not
concerns
practical.
Money.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, it wasn't practical. There was no practical application of ZK before Zcash. Like, I would challenge it. I mean, of course, every idea has precedent. You know, has I mean, Bitcoin also wasn't made from nothing. You know, there were many ideas that fed into it. You know, triple entry accounting and hash cash, and you know, all these influences. I mean, everything comes from somewhere. You know. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah.
No, it's all good. It was all coming from this idea that I look to these projects that actually build something that Bitcoin can take as off-the-shelf libraries and just soft fork them to the protocol, become more robust. To me, right now, Bitcoin is like Linux. It's a software, it's a library, it's a kernel. It's something from which you can build, it's something you can modify, it's something with which you can experiment. Of course, the difference between Linux and Bitcoin is that there is a monetary aspect to it. And there are coins, and there are investors, and there are expectations. And it can get perverted very easily. And you can also scam people very easily by making promises and not delivering anything of what you're promising, or just underperforming, and people will call you a scammer. But if you're doing something interesting and you're pushing the limits of what was previously considered to be impossible, I respect that. I like. So we both agree that Ethereum is a mess and it's overly complicated, but the stuff that it did was a net positive. And also Zcash, it had a rough start, but right now I think it's exactly what it was meant to be when it was launched. And much more than that, they're trying to research shielded tokens and some other interesting stuff, which honestly is useful. Like we have stablecoins nowadays, which seem to be popular, but they're just CBDCs in disguise. They are programmed so that the issuer can blacklist certain transactions so that they cannot send money anymore. That's not why we got here. And people say, well, stablecoins are bullish because they empower the third world and they help people in authoritarian regimes escape their country. Well, as long as they're allowed to transact, that's the caveat.
It's true. There's a lot of compromises that got made to get to that point, and I think on the one hand, yeah, stablecoins are freezable. On the other hand, you don't need to do any KYC to make a crypto account and then receive stablecoins. So in some sense, that was the trade-off we got, is that now you don't have to ask anybody's permission to have a US bank account equivalent anywhere in the world, which I think is, I mean, that's market forces being applied to, governments. I mean, essentially, the US was like, oh, we're about to lose our global reserve status. How do we keep it? Okay, well, we've got the distribution. That's our big advantage. How do we let's double down on what we have and let go of a couple of, the nice to haves. And banks need to behave better. They've became very abusive. I mean, like, just this, like it's like the customer service you get from Monopoly, where they think that you have nowhere else to go, and so they can, you know, demand that you jump through all these hoops and ask you all these invasive questions and turn your money off whenever they don't like what you're doing for any reason. And and you can only get away with that for so long before people look for alternatives. And I think that's what stablecoins represent to a lot of people is, but I don't think, I'm glad that Bitcoin exists, and I'm glad that stablecoins exist. I feel like it's a natural sort of evolution of the ecosystem. But yeah, I think people should know that your money can be frozen in stables. Like, I don't think enough people know that.
For me, there were two big eye openers. First of all, getting my girlfriend, who's from Iran, and realizing how much she's struggling with something as basic as going to a bank, opening an account, and keeping it open for longer than a month. It happened to her a lot of times. For example, Revolut, they shut down her account. If she goes to local banks, it's also problematic. They ask her for ridiculous amounts in deposits, like $10,000 in initial deposit to open an account, just because she has that one passport that says Islamic Republic of Iran. And she's a student. She's trying to become a dentist now. She's really great, but her experience of struggling with mainstream finance has actually opened my eyes. And my other eye-opening moment was traveling to Argentina before the elections. This was 2 years ago. And I think before that, I was going to a lot of Bitcoin conferences where people were just paying in Lightning. And it was sort of a custom that you have a Lightning wallet loaded up and ready to pay. And I wanted to buy one of those Yubi keys from one of the vendors. And they were like, yeah, but we only accept Tether. I was like, what? This is La BitConf. It's a Bitcoin conference and you want me to pay in Tether? And they're like, yeah, but we don't have a Lightning wallet. But if you have Binance, you can pay us with Tether on Binance. And I was like, do you understand that this is not decentralized in any way and it's just credit on some exchange? And they're like, we don't care. We just want Tether. And then I interacted with more of these merchants and I realized I was living in a bubble. It's almost like I landed in another planet and there was no way for me to actually make my Lightning Bitcoin useful unless I was going to some swapping service. And I think I went to SiteShift or something, and I was able to get one of these transactions. But a few months later, SiteShift removed Lightning because it was too much work for them to maintain, and the number of users is small.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, it's, I think it was something that COVID taught me was that, like, okay, these big guys at the top of the pyramid, if you will, they do understand something about human psychology, and it doesn't apply in 100% of cases. But if you're like, if you're an early Bitcoiner, you're super into technology, and like all like you're probably some kind of outlier. You're not like the propaganda. I mean, like, governments are at some level like a business, and they have a marketing department, or propaganda department, and they have different cohorts. You have different subgroups of your, say, customers that think differently, that have different concerns, and so you have to have a different message for those different cohorts, and you have to have a different channel to reach them, and so you know people, like, different people vote for the same candidate for sometimes even contradictory reasons. They were promised different things through different channels, through like micro targeting campaigns, and so you know people don't like, most people do not have the time, capacity, or interest to like look deeply into like, where does money come from, or how does this payment technology work, or like what's happening with digital ID. Like, a lot of people are just struggling to survive, and so,
By design, they're struggling to survive by design because,
right, it keeps you busy,
yeah.
right, and it keeps you from like sitting back and like asking bigger questions, be like, what am I doing with my life, or like, where does credit come from, and I tell this story about an old friend of mine. He used to work in Wall Street. He went to a like Harvard MBA, and he was like, brokering all these big deals on Wall Street, and he retired early, made a bunch of money. Anyway, 2008 happened, and I mentioned to him, I said, hey, like, I think this QE thing, I think they're just printing money. I mean, I didn't know that much about the economics at this point, but I was like learning. I was like, I think they're just printing money. He's like, no way. There's no way that that's what's going on. And I'm like, okay, well, since, tough finance bro, like, all right, why don't you go research and explain it to me? He's like, fine, I'll call you back in a couple of weeks. Anyway, he called me back the next day, and he said, I can't believe nobody told me. They really are just printing money. So you can be up to your neck in it and swimming around in all these, like, oceans of liquidity, and like, and you're busy. You're not, like, step back and be like, wait a second, where's all this money come from? And if counterfeiting is illegal, central banking should be illegal.
Amen to that. But once again, we're past that point, and legal doesn't mean moral. And that's something that we need to understand sooner or later in adult life. Like, just because the law is in place doesn't mean, first of all, that it's moral, doesn't mean that it's going to get applied equally to all market participants or society participants, and doesn't mean that it's going to be respected, because there's also the other side of it. For example, what I've learned in COVID was that what was written on paper about rules and whatever you're supposed to do is not what was happening outside when you were walking out in the streets. At least not in my country. I don't know how it was in other countries, but I was seeing people just not wear masks, and that was beautiful. It was
Yeah.
such a big difference between what you were seeing on TV when you were watching, and they were showing all of these pictures of people who are sick in hospitals and whatever, and you stepped outside and you saw that life went on, and it was so beautiful and nice. And your only roadblock was when you were entering some sort of restaurant and they had to check for your vaccine passport or whatever. We call that the green card in Europe. And luckily, I got infected, and I had a passport for like 6 months or something. I was considered to be immune naturally. I don't know. It was some of the craziest times I've lived so far. And I've learned so much. And the scariest part is how fast people forgot about everything. They're like, okay, we're back to normal. Nothing happened. Oh, we were
It's just a
coerced
bad
into
dream.
staying in our home. Exactly, bad dream. We're back to normal. Nothing happened. Oh, the virus
Yeah.
was never that bad in the first place. We can get it now. We survive. Why was any of that necessary? Well, it was a worse virus variant and blah blah blah. Yeah, I'm not buying it.
No, I think normally this sort of like, this marketing machine from the governments is mostly invisible. You hear about it through like TV anchors or like your local influencer, but every once in a while the whole system moves in synchrony. When they want everyone to move, suddenly everybody starts saying the same thing, like build back better, build back better, build back better. And new normal, new, and I mean these memes somehow traveled all around the world without even changing languages in many cases into other countries, and everybody, all the governments start saying it all at once, and it was uh, and I was in a back when I lived in the States, I was quite involved in the psychedelic community, and I was very supportive of maps and various organizations, and I was pretty shocked to see these people that I thought were sort of like freedom fighters, because they had you know you know deconditioned themselves by like turning the language off and then turn it back on, and like getting neuroplastic and squishy, and I was shocked to see so many of these people just become like the most vigorous enforcers of the new thought regime, and and it was heartbreaking, to be honest. I was like, hey guys, I thought like your religion was illegal not too long ago, and now like those guys you think are like trying to protect you with this free drug, that you're not allowed to question. Like, it just, I don't know, not everybody makes it through the initiation ritual. I mean, that's I think what it comes down to is Mother Nature is a crazy woman. She's incredibly beautiful, and she's a vicious, cruel bitch sometimes, and she'll just like cut your throat if she feels like it. And
But once again, the story of the free drug is that basically the side that took it and said it was the best shit ever expected the other side to just die off. And the side that thought it was poison and they should not take it because reasons also expected the others to die off. And now we just find ourselves looking at the other ones being like, huh. So we're still here. Nothing happened. Bad dream. Okay, let's forget about everything. Even though I still know some people who don't talk to each other because of their opinions on vaccination, but nothing else. It wasn't lockdowns. It wasn't the fact that the government was putting them out of work forcefully. They were not allowed, even if they were in the private sector, they were not allowed to go to work. They had to stay at home and receive welfare. Their kids could not go to school. But somehow it's just the vaccines that divide people. And that's all.
yeah, I mean, it's an interesting sort of like, I mean, the needle. A lot of people are afraid of needles, and I knew people who said, "Oh, I didn't get it because I'm afraid of needles." And the needle is this like little, very small thing that can puncture, right? It can sort of violate your physical boundaries, but without too much resistance, right? If it was like a big fat needle, then it would be harder, right? It's very, very thin. It's easy. It's just a little jab. It's not such
Man,
a big
I
deal. Like,
got
what
a
are you worried
vaccine
about?
last week. It was anti-tetanus. Is that what you call it? I got an
Yeah,
infection. I got that one, but it's been around for like 50 years or something. It's super tested. You know the side effects. I'm
right. I mean,
not
this,
anti, science or medicine or whatever. It's just that when you have something which is brand new and it's being experimented for the first time on humans and it was used unsuccessfully on chimpanzees before, like you want me to just be like, okay, put that in my arm, I'm fine.
yeah. Well, I mean, the each vaccine is its own technology, and there have been vaccines that were taken off the market because they were, because they had problems, and So this idea of like, we're just going to take this word vaccine and anything we apply it to makes that thing like holy and good is like, again, just being like just way too seduced by words, like it's like Pavlov's dogs, like Pavlov's vaccines. It's like all vaccines good or all vaccines bad. And it's like, and it's like, you hit the dogs over the head with a piece of meat long enough and then they start liking it. So I really, you know, every moment is a judgment call. Like you can't just like apply some fucking like robot, some system and then just like forget about it and just check out and just I'm going to let this heuristic run my whole life. You're like, no, you got to show up and make a decision in every moment. Is this the right thing for me? And that's why, I want to show you something. So I've been making these for almost 15 years now, and it's a freedom license. And and I'll read you the back of it. It says, the holder of this license has the authority to do whatever he or she wishes. Every moment is an opportunity to take responsibility for your life and your world. And to me, I humans are highly conditioned to respect decorated pieces of paper, whether that's money or diplomas or titles. It's like ultimately it's a piece of paper with some words on it, and like it looks like some pretty nice decoration. I mean, to be honest, like I couldn't, that must be from the king, right? It's not just anybody can decorate a piece of paper like that, And to me, it's ultimately like life is so complex, like every moment is the cause of all the moments that comes after it, and it's also the effect of every moment that came before it. And so this idea of cause and effect is like actually quite squirrely and squishy and malleable. And you can tell a story where you're just everyone else is doing things to you, life is just happening to you, and that actually can be like a very wonderful experience to just kind of surrender and let life flow through you. I think that's a beautiful thing. And it's also equally valid to seize control, to be the one that creates the new world. And this is also a valid way to look at the life, that you're the cause of your environment. And this is called having agency. It's also called taking responsibility for your life. If you want something to change, like you could hope and wish. Sometimes things do change, but you could also grab life by the balls and make it happen.
Yeah. I wish more people took agency instead of asking for permission. And it sort of hurts in the Bitcoin world that I've interviewed so many frustrated developers who are like, if we just get this one upcode and I can build such a beautiful system with it. Like I can do something really incredible. I have this beautiful software. I can't wait to release it. It's been on testnet for years. People have been trying it and they have been praising it. And I've been around the world to conferences and I've received a lot of praise. But it's just these plebs who don't agree with me, or it's just this Blockstream organization that thinks the priorities should be reversed and we don't need this. And it's just these trolls on Reddit or Bitcoin Talk or whatever who disagree with me. It just hurts, because there's so much good stuff that could exist on Bitcoin. There's so much utility that could have been built on Bitcoin, but we don't get it. And then we see all of these layer ones getting built for very good reasons, to try technology which needs to mature, needs to reach its full potential. But the question is, are the users really increasing? Like, are we actually seeing with every wave of adoption, with every bull market, more users coming? Or are we just fighting for the same 100,000 people who are in some ways more or less dogmatic about what they're using? Because I have the same conversation with the people building ZK rollups and ARC and stuff like this on Bitcoin. And I'm like, this is interesting, it's cool, it's useful, but how many people you think are actually gonna switch and give it a try and have the open mind to say, well, let's see if this is any good? Because most of the people, they LARP about using stuff. They don't actually use it. They just keep their coins on exchanges like Binance or Coinbase or Kraken or whatever, and they're comfortable with it. and then they spend time fighting people and saying, no, Bitcoin is this and that and it's great, but they're not using it. It's no different from buying a stock on Robinhood or whatever. And I really wish that Quantus is gonna get a user base with people actually trying, as opposed to just speculating on what the token is gonna be worth. Because I don't know, maybe it's human nature, but that's gonna be the primary use, and a lot of people will just learn the language that they need to speak in order to promote the advantages of the network, but never actually use the advantages. And the question is, how do you get people to try software?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like, everything is a funnel at some level, where, you need to have like a short-term, medium-term, long-term plan. And so there's like, a certain amount of like, candy you have to throw to the wild animals to attract them, but they will leave if you don't have something that's actually useful to make them stick around. And I think, I think there's a lot of talented engineers who've come into crypto, but, engineers tend to be interested in things, not people. And so if you're one of those people, you you need to team up with somebody who's good with people and understands what they want. And so, I'm blessed to have a wonderful co-founder who's got a very different brain than me, who's thinks like a Sicilian merchant, and he like knows what everybody wants and how to get everyone what they need. And and he's got this like, and we all need to come together for dinner, and so this is an essential part to having a product that actually gets used by people. Because um just like technology is the crucible of science, well, I mean, market adoption is the crucible of technology. Like, I mean, you made a cool thing, cool, nobody cares. Nobody cares. How does it make their life better? And this is a challenging thing for people who just want to like sort of play with gadgets in their closet. And that's not a bad thing. It's just sort of recognize like the thing by itself is not a complete business. Making cool tech is not a business. And so, I think something I would love to see that I think would just like, could increase adoption without forking Bitcoin at all, is if people started using this check phrase thing. It makes it easier to tell whether you're sending Bitcoin to the right address. And it's not specific to our chain or even to blockchains in general. Anywhere that people have to check a hash or something, you could use this. And I didn't really invent it. I was inspired by Telegram. If you make a call on Telegram, they show you some emojis that's derived from the shared key with the other person on the other line. And so you can say the emojis over the line to have a reasonable assurance that you have the same key. So anyway, this is something I'd like to see that wallets could adopt. And it's just sort of like, hey guys, like, let's include the human in the design. It's not just like, it's not machines over there, humans over here. Humans are complicated. Let's ignore them and just focus on the machines because they're super predictable. And I don't feel emotionally safe with these, like, this messy human nature thing. Like, no, like, the cost of being uninterested in politics is being ruled by your inferiors. So, um, like, get over it. Go talk to people.
Well, I don't disagree with you. I think it goes back to an argument by Plato that if you don't get involved in politics, you're gonna end up being governed by inferior people. But at the same time, it's not that bad as long as you have some sort of leverage. Like if you economically control those who govern you, and you can, it doesn't have to be selfish or self-interested. It can also be benevolent in a way that you keep them in check and you make sure that they get funded only when they do a pretty good job, and they get elected into office only when you think that they're doing a good job. But yeah.
Yeah, it's like habeas corpus, like the whole story of like how we got the right, in some, at least some parts of the world, to not be thrown in prison without being charged with something. And it was the noblemen in England ganged up on the king because the king was misbehaving. He was like using his power too tyrannically, and they ganged up on him and say, listen, you're still the king, but there's certain things you can't do. And he's like, okay, all right, fine, all right, because he needed the nobleman still needed a king. So there was this like, but they had to assert themselves, and if you just roll over and let these Larry Fink and Sam Altman kind of steamroll you, then you're kind of electing to be a slave. So it's up to you to decide whether or not you're a slave.
What makes you optimistic in general about Bitcoin, Quantus, the world in general? Like, what is a good reason to not feel depressed?
I mean, sunlight. I get up in the morning and I look at the sun, and it just fills me with joy. I think you know I think there's like something you just have to understand. Like the world was already super complex 100 years ago, but now it's just exploding in complexity. Nobody knows what's going on. It's just a free for all. It's like the idea that there's like some man controlling everything. Like, yeah, there's people conspiring. There's powerful people out there, and some of them might be somewhat friendly to you, and some of them might not be. But you know what? Like nobody has control of this shit. The whole thing is just a dream. And so like we're in this like slow motion lucid dream where you can form an intention, but it doesn't instantly manifest. Like when you go to sleep, if you lucid dream, like you want something, there you go, you got it. But here in this more dense realm, you form an intention and you have to stay focused on it. You have to be persistent and patient for that dream, for that intention to manifest in the dream. But if you focus and act out your true will, nobody can say no to you. The whole universe will bend down and let you fuck her.
Let you what?
Fuck her. The universe is a beautiful woman, but she's a little crazy. Sometimes,
I mean, just like every beautiful woman out there. So I'd recommend to people to go to soundcloud.com/GANESHA1024. Listen to the music and then read the Quantus documents on quantus.com, which is QUANTUS.com. And it's going to be beautiful. Like the latest album where you're playing piano and there's a soprano who's singing opera kind of music without any kind of words. It's just sounds, kind of like a bird. To me, it sounds like... So there's this song in the middle of The Dark Side of the Moon that's called Great Gig in the Sky. It sounds exactly like that, but more classical. There's nothing electronic on it. There are no other effects. It's just you playing piano in a room that's filled with chatter, and there's this soprano that's singing. And it's unusual. I think that's the best way to describe it. It's unusual. It's not formulaic. It doesn't follow patterns. It's very improvisational. And I think it's a good way to go through the documentation of Quantus.
Well, that's a wonderful comparison. I mean, I love Pink Floyd, and really, happy to hear such compliments from you, sir.
I mean, that's what it sounds like to me. Maybe I'm not cultured enough to have an opera reference, right? With something that has no words. It's just sounds and vowels.
Yeah, I mean, it's challenging to improvise words and a melody at the same time, so it's a little easier to just make noise. But, the way I learned to sing while playing was, because it's sort of multitasking, right? And so it's challenging. So the thing I did first is I just hold a single tone, just hum while I'm playing. And then after a while, once I get comfortable with the humming, I can occasionally change the pitch and humming. And so to me, it's all about these thin end of the wedge, you just sort of like, okay, you try to stick some more in there. Like, okay, just go easy. Like, don't do too fast, So, but yeah, anyway, Vlad, this has been wonderful. I thank you for having me on the show. The time has flown by. I didn't realize how late it was.
My shows are usually pretty long. People challenge me usually. And they say, oh, let's see how long this guy can talk. Let's see if this guy can keep up. And it all started with Amir Taki last year. He was on the show. He spoke for 7 hours, 20 minutes.
What?
And he
Well,
was just rambling. He was talking about his favorite mathematicians. He was talking about physics, and then he got into why he decided to not use ring signatures for DarkFi. It was all over the place, but he spoke for 7 hours, 20 minutes. And after that interview, which turned out to be super popular, a bunch of guys came and they said, let me see if I can break that record. And some people have matched it, like Zuko has been on for 6 hours.
Wow. I look up to Amir and Zuko, but particularly Amir. I feel like he to me represents the kind of early cypherpunk faction of Bitcoin that was sort of I think understood what it was really about. And I'm definitely not going to be able to make it to 7 hours. I'm already getting pretty sleepy. Grandpa needs his beauty rest over here. So
it's all good, sir. Thank you very much. Once again, on Twitter, he is Yuvi Lightman. His real name is Christopher Smith. The website where you can find his work is Quantus.com. And what else? Is there anything that I forgot? Any closing words?
I don't know. My blog is weaponizedschizophrenia.com. I think
yeah.
if you're interested in cybernetics and weird math applied to, neurology is, some people really like it. And some people are like, what the fuck is this? I don't ever want to read this again. So, but
hence the name.
Yeah, there we go. It's not for everybody, but that's it. Samalama ding dong. And, good day to you, sir. Live long and prosper. And, don't forget, you do whatever the fuck you want.
Yeah, and check out the interview with Shambo next week.
Yeah. Shambo.